Qur'an Chapter 26, Surah Ash-Shu'ara, by Sayyid Qutb. Translation by Muhammad Al-Amrani. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Ta Sin Mim. These are the verses of the clear book. Perhaps you would consume yourself with grief that they do not believe. If we so willed, we could send down upon them a sign from the heavens, so their necks would remain humbled before it. But no fresh reminder comes to them from the most merciful, except that they turn away from it. Thus they have denied the truth, but soon there will come to them the tidings of what they mocked. Have they not looked at the earth, how much of every noble kind we have caused to grow in it? Indeed, in that is a sign, yet most of them are not believers. And truly your sustainer is the Almighty, the most merciful. The central theme of this surah aligns with the overarching message of all Meccan revelations, the essence of faith, encapsulated in its fundamental elements, the oneness of God. So do not invoke, besides God, another deity, lest you be among those who are punished. The fear of the hereafter. Do not disgrace me on the day they are resurrected, the day when neither wealth nor children will avail except for one who comes to God with a sound heart. The affirmation of the revelation sent down upon Muhammad, the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him. Indeed, it is a revelation from the sustainer of the worlds, brought down by the trustworthy Spirit upon your heart, so that you may be among the warners. And finally, the warning of the consequences of denial. Whether it be the punishment of this world that annihilates the deniers, or the torment of the hereafter that awaits the disbelievers. Indeed, they have denied, so soon there will come to them the tidings of what they mocked. And the wrongdoers will come to know to what a wretched end they will return. This surah also serves to console the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, and to comfort him regarding the rejection of the disbelievers toward him and the Qur'an. Perhaps you would consume yourself with grief that they do not believe. It reassures the hearts of the believers, fortifying them against the hardship and hostility they face from the disbelievers, and encouraging them to remain steadfast in their faith, regardless of the persecution they endure at the hands of the oppressors, just as the believers before them were steadfast. The body of the surah consists of narratives occupying 180 of its total verses. The surah itself is comprised of these narratives, preceded by an introduction and followed by a conclusion. Together, the introduction, the narratives and the conclusion form a unified, harmonious composition that vividly expresses the surah's theme, conveying it through diverse styles, all converging toward a single purpose. Accordingly, from each narrative, only the segment or segments that serve these objectives are presented. A tone of warning and denunciation pervades the narratives and the surah as a whole, along with the punishments that follow denial. The surah confronts the rejection of the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, by the polytheists of Quraysh, their mockery of the warnings, their turning away from the signs of God, and their hastening for the punishment they were warned about, all while accusing the revelation and the Qur'an of being sorcery or poetry brought down by devils. The surah moves seamlessly through these themes, its introduction, narratives and conclusion forming a single cohesive journey. Therefore, we may divide it into segments or rounds according to its sequence, beginning with the introduction before delving into the selected narratives. Ta Sin Mim. These are the verses of the clear book. The disjointed letters Ta, Sin, Mim serve as a means of drawing attention to the fact that the verses of the clear book, including this surah, are composed of these very letters. These letters, readily available to the deniers of revelation, are nevertheless beyond their capacity to arrange into anything resembling this clear book. The discourse on this book is interwoven throughout the surah, appearing in both its introduction and conclusion, as is characteristic of the chapters of the Qur'an that begin with disjointed letters. After this opening, the surah turns to address the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, whose concern for the disbelievers' fate and whose anguish at their rejection of him and the Qur'an weighed heavily upon his heart. The surah consoles him, lightens his burden, and acknowledges the magnitude of his suffering for their sake. Perhaps you would consume yourself with grief that they do not believe. If we so willed, we could send down upon them a sign from the heavens, so their necks would remain humbled before it. Here the expression contains an element of gentle reproach for the intensity of the prophet's, peace and blessings be upon him, sorrow and concern over their disbelief. Perhaps you would consume yourself with grief that they do not believe. The phrase consume yourself with grief conveys the notion of self-destruction through overwhelming sorrow, vividly illustrating the depths of the prophet's, peace and blessings be upon him, anguish over their rejection. He was deeply grieved, knowing the fate that awaited them after their denial. His heart melted in sorrow for they were his kin, his tribe, his people. His chest tightened with this burden, and so his sustainer, in his boundless compassion, sought to relieve him of this crushing grief, to ease his heartache, and to remind him that their belief was not his responsibility. Had God willed, he could have compelled them to believe by sending down a sign from the heavens, a sign so overpowering that they would have no choice but to submit to it. If we so willed, we could send down upon them a sign from the heavens, so their necks would remain humbled before it. The imagery here portrays their submission in a tangible physical manner, necks bowed, humbled, and permanently bent under the weight of this sign, as if this state of submission were an inherent characteristic of their being. Yet, in his infinite wisdom, God chose not to make this final message accompanied by an overpowering coercive sign. Instead, he made its ultimate sign, the Qur'an itself, a complete way of life, miraculous in every aspect. Miraculous in its linguistic structure and artistic harmony, consistent in its unique characteristics, unchanging in its level of excellence, and free of the fluctuations seen in human works, where the same individual produces varying levels of quality depending on their circumstances. The Quran, on the other hand, maintains a uniform level of perfection, testifying to its divine origin. Miraculous in its intellectual framework and thematic coherence, with all its components perfectly aligned and integrated. There is no randomness or coincidence within it. All its directives and laws are interconnected, forming a comprehensive whole that envelops and addresses every aspect of human life, meeting its needs and propelling it forward without any internal contradiction or conflict between its various components, and without clashing with the innate human disposition or falling short of fulfilling it. All of it is bound together by a single axis, a single unbreakable bond, in a harmony that lies beyond the capacity of human expertise, limited as it is by the constraints of time and space. This harmony could only have been achieved by an absolute, all-encompassing knowledge unrestricted by such limitations. Miraculous in its ease of access to hearts and souls, in its ability to touch their keys, unlock their locks, and stir within them the chords of emotion and responsiveness. Miraculous in how it addresses their complexities and dilemmas with astounding simplicity and clarity, guiding and shaping them according to its method with the gentlest of touches, without complication, ambiguity, or pretense. Indeed, it was God's will to make this Quran the miracle of this final message. He did not will to send down a material, overpowering sign that would force necks to bow and compel submission. For this last message is a universal one, open to all nations and all generations. It is not confined to the people of a single time or place. Therefore, it was fitting for its miracle to also be universal, open to the near and the far, to every nation and every generation. Overwhelming miracles only compel those who witness them directly, leaving behind mere stories to be retold rather than a living reality to be experienced. But the Quran, here it stands, more than 13 centuries later, still an open book, still a clear path. It remains a source from which the people of this age could draw to organize their lives if they were guided to take it as their leader. It fulfills their needs completely, guiding them to a better world, a higher horizon, and a nobler destiny. And those who come after us will find within it much that we have not yet discovered. For the Quran gives to each seeker according to their need, and its treasures never diminish, rather they are ever renewed. But they, the disbelievers, were blind to this immense wisdom. They turned away from the Quran, this great and noble revelation, as it descended upon them time and time again. No fresh reminder comes to them from the Most Merciful, but that they turn away from it. The name, the Most Merciful, is invoked here to highlight his immense mercy in bestowing this revelation upon them. Their turning away from it, therefore, appears all the more abhorrent and repugnant. They reject the mercy that is being sent down to them. They spurn it and deprive themselves of it at a time when they are in the greatest need of it. This turning away is followed by a dire warning of God's punishment. Yet they have denied, so soon there will come to them the tidings of what they mocked. It is a veiled, concise and terrifying threat. The expression carries a tone of irony that matches their mockery of the warnings. So soon there will come to them the tidings of what they mocked. They will soon receive the news of the punishment they mocked, but it will not be mere tidings they receive. They will taste the punishment itself, and in that punishment they themselves will become the news. People will speak of their fate as a lesson, but still they mock. And so the warning carries an ironic mirroring of their derision. They demand an extraordinary, overwhelming sign, while neglecting the wondrous signs of God all around them, signs that are sufficient for any heart that is open, for any perception that is clear. Every page of this marvelous universe is a sign, capable of bringing peace to hearts. Have they not looked at the earth how much of every noble kind we have caused to grow in it? Truly, in this is a sign, yet most of them are not believers. The miracle of bringing forth living plants from the earth, creating them in pairs, male and female, whether as separate entities in certain species or together in the same organism, as is common in the plant kingdom, where the male and female reproductive parts coexist within a single stem. This miracle is repeated in the earth around them at every moment. Have they not looked? It requires no more than a glance. The Quranic method of guidance links the human heart to the sights of this universe. It awakens dulled senses, stirs sluggish minds, and opens closed hearts to the wonders of God's creation that are scattered all around them. It inspires people to explore this living universe with a living heart, to see God's presence in the marvels of his creation, to feel him whenever their eyes fall upon the beauty of his handiwork, and to stay connected to him through his creations. It urges awareness of God's watchfulness, fostering a constant sense of his presence in every moment of day and night. It reminds humanity that they are but one part of God's creation, bound to the same universal laws that govern all beings. Each person has their unique role in this great cosmic order, particularly on this earth where humans have been entrusted as stewards. Have they not looked at the earth, how much of every noble kind we have caused to grow in it? Noble in the life it contains, which emanates from the generous Creator. The word itself evokes reverence and gratitude toward God's handiwork, urging an attitude of honor and celebration rather than heedlessness or disregard. Truly, in this is a sign. They demand signs, yet most of them do not believe in this sign. Yet most of them are not believers. The introduction of the Surah concludes with a recurring refrain that appears after each display of God's signs. And truly your sustainer is the Almighty, the Most Merciful. The Almighty, capable of creating these signs and punishing those who reject them, the Most Merciful, revealing these signs to guide hearts and granting respite to the deniers, not punishing them until he has sent them a clear warning. The signs in creation are abundant and sufficient, but his mercy decrees that he also sends messengers to illuminate hearts, bring glad tidings and issue warnings. And lo, thy sustainer called unto Moses, saying, Go to the wrongdoing people, the people of Pharaoh. Will they not be conscious of me? Moses said, O my sustainer, indeed I fear that they will deny me, and my heart will shrink, and my tongue will not move freely. So send for Aaron to assist me. Moreover, they have a charge against me, and I fear that they will kill me. God said, Nay, go forth, both of you, with our signs. Indeed, we are with you listening. So go to Pharaoh and say, We are messengers of the sustainer of all worlds. Let the children of Israel go with us. But Pharaoh said, Did we not raise you among us as a child, and did you not dwell among us for many years of your life? And then you committed that deed of yours, and you were among the ungrateful. Moses replied, I committed it then, while I was among the misguided, so I fled from you when I feared you. Then my sustainer granted me wisdom and made me one of the messengers. And is this a favor you taunt me with, that you enslaved the children of Israel? Pharaoh asked, And what is the sustainer of all worlds? Moses said, The sustainer of the heavens and the earth, and all that is between them, if you would but be certain. Pharaoh said to those around him, Do you not hear? Moses said, Your sustainer and the sustainer of your forefathers of old. Pharaoh retorted, Indeed, your messenger who has been sent to you is surely possessed. Moses said, The sustainer of the east and the west and all that is between them, if you would but reason. Pharaoh declared, If you take a god other than me, I will surely imprison you. Moses said, Even if I bring you something manifest? Pharaoh said, Then bring it forth, if you are truthful. Moses threw his staff, and behold, it became a serpent, manifest before their eyes. And he drew forth his hand, and lo, it was white and radiant for all to see. Pharaoh said to the assembly around him, Indeed, this is a learned sorcerer. He seeks to drive you out of your land with his sorcery. So what do you propose? They said, Postpone his matter and the matter of his brother, and send gatherers to all the cities. They will bring to you every learned sorcerer. And so the sorcerers were assembled at the appointed time on a well-known day, and it was said to the people, Will you gather so that we might follow the sorcerers if they are victorious? When the sorcerers came, they said to Pharaoh, Indeed, shall we have a reward if we are the victors? Pharaoh said, Yes, and indeed you will then be among those brought near to me. Moses said to them, Cast whatever you wish to cast. So they threw their ropes and their staffs, and they said, By the might of Pharaoh, indeed, it is we who will prevail. Then Moses threw his staff, and behold, it devoured what they had falsified. Thereupon the sorcerers fell down in prostration. They said, We believe in the sustainer of all worlds, the sustainer of Moses and Aaron. Pharaoh exclaimed, You have believed in him before I have given you permission. Indeed, he is your leader who has taught you sorcery. But soon you shall know. Surely I will cut off your hands and your feet on alternate sides, and I will crucify you all. The sorcerers said, No harm. Indeed, to our sustainer we shall return. Indeed, we hope that our sustainer will forgive us our sins, for we were the first to believe. And we revealed to Moses, Set forth with my servants by night, for indeed you will be pursued. Then Pharaoh sent gatherers throughout the cities, saying, Indeed, these are but a small band, and indeed they have angered us. But we are all on guard and prepared. So we expelled them from gardens and springs and treasures and noble stations. Thus was it, and we caused the children of Israel to inherit it, so they pursued them at sunrise. And when the two groups saw one another, the companions of Moses said, Indeed, we are overtaken. Moses said, Nay, indeed, with me is my sustainer. He will guide me. Then we inspired Moses, Strike the sea with your staff. And it parted, and each side became like a great mountain. And we brought the others close, and we saved Moses and those with him altogether. Then we drowned the others. Indeed, in this is a sign, yet most of them were not to believe. And indeed, your sustainer, he is the Almighty, the most merciful. This episode from the story of Moses, peace be upon him, appears in this surah in perfect harmony with its theme and its overarching aim, to depict the ultimate fate of those who deny the truth of the divine message, to reassure and console the prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, regarding the rejection and ridicule he faces from the disbelievers, and to highlight God's care for his message and those who believe in it, even if they are stripped of all worldly power, while their enemies are mighty tyrants who oppress them with cruelty and torment. This was precisely the situation of the Muslims in Mecca at the time of this surah's revelation, and the stories of past prophets were one of the Qur'an's primary methods of spiritual and moral instruction. Episodes from the story of Moses, peace be upon him, have already been presented in surahs Al-Baqarah, Al-Ma'idah, Al-Araf, Yunus, Al-Isra, Al-Kahf and Taha, along with allusions to it in other surahs. Each time, the episodes or allusions selected are perfectly in tune with the theme of the respective surah and its flow, contributing to the imagery and message conveyed by the context. The episode presented here is that of Moses' mission, the rejection of his message and the drowning of Pharaoh and his courtiers as a consequence of their obstinacy and as retribution for their plotting against Moses and the believers with him. It also tells of Moses and the Israelites being saved from the schemes of the wrongdoers, thus affirming God's words in this surah. And those who have committed wrong shall come to know what an end they shall meet. Indeed, they have denied the truth, but soon will come to them reports of that which they used to ridicule. This episode is divided into dramatic scenes separated by narrative gaps, as though a curtain falls upon one scene only to rise again on the next. This artistic feature is a hallmark of the Quranic style in presenting stories. Here there are 7 scenes. The first is the scene of Moses being called to his mission and receiving divine revelation. The second is his confrontation with Pharaoh and his courtiers, with the signs of the staff and the shining hand. The third is the scheming of Pharaoh and the gathering of the sorcerers, along with the mobilization of the people for the great contest. The fourth is the scene of the sorcerers in Pharaoh's presence, seeking assurance of reward and compensation. The fifth is the contest itself, the sorcerers' subsequent faith, and Pharaoh's threats and warnings. The sixth consists of 2 parts. The first is God's command to Moses to lead his people away by night, and the second is Pharaoh's mobilization of his forces to pursue them. The 7th and final scene is the confrontation at the sea, culminating in its parting, the drowning of the oppressors, and the salvation of the believers. These scenes have been presented in Surahs Al-Araf, Yunus and Taha, but in each instance they are narrated in a manner that suits the context of the respective surah, focusing on specific aspects of the story. For example, in Al-Araf, the narrative begins with the confrontation between Moses and Pharaoh, moving swiftly through the contest with the sorcerers to focus instead on Pharaoh's schemes and the signs shown to him during Moses' time in Egypt before the drowning and salvation. It then continues to recount the Israelites' journey after crossing the sea, which is omitted here. Instead, Al-Araf expands on the debate between Moses and Pharaoh concerning God's oneness and his revelation to his messenger, which aligns with the theme of the surah and its ongoing debate with the idolaters. In Yunus, the story begins with a brief mention of the confrontation, omitting the signs of the staff and the shining hand, and similarly condenses the account of the contest. Here, however, both are given greater detail. In Taha, the narrative elaborates on Moses' initial dialogue with his sustainer and follows the Israelites' journey in greater depth after the confrontation and the contest. However, in this surah, the focus does not extend beyond the drowning and salvation. This diversity in presentation ensures that the story is never repetitive, despite being told in numerous surahs. The choice of episodes, the particular scenes selected, the angles emphasized, and the manner of presentation all render the narrative fresh and harmonious with each context. And remember when your sustainer called out to Moses, saying, "Go to the wrongdoing people, the people of Pharaoh. Will they not fear God?" He said, "My sustainer, I fear that they will deny me, and my heart will constrict, and my tongue will not move freely, so send Aaron with me. Moreover, they have a claim against me for a past deed, and I fear they will kill me." He said, "Nay, go forth, both of you, with our signs. Indeed, we are with you listening. So go to Pharaoh and say, 'We are the messengers of the sustainer of all worlds. Let the children of Israel go with us.'" This narrative is addressed to the prophet peace and blessings be upon him after the opening of the surah, where he is consoled. "Perhaps you will destroy yourself with grief because they will not believe. If we so willed, we could send down upon them a sign from the sky, before which their necks would remain humbled. But whenever a new reminder from the Most Merciful comes to them, they turn away from it. Indeed, they have denied, but soon will come to them reports of that which they used to ridicule." The account of Moses begins here, illustrating what befell those who denied, rejected and mocked, and the painful doom that overtook them. The first scene is that of Moses' commissioning with his mission. It begins with the description of Pharaoh and his people as wrongdoing people, for they wrong themselves through disbelief and error, and they wrong the Israelites by slaughtering their sons, sparing their women, and oppressing them with forced labor and cruelty. Thus their wrongdoing is emphasized before identifying them as the people of Pharaoh. Moses marvels at their condition, as should every reflective soul. Will they not fear God? Will they not dread their sustainer? Will they not fear the consequences of their wrongdoing? Will they not turn back from their error? Their condition is indeed astonishing, warranting this tone of amazement, an amazement that applies to all tyrants like them. Moses, peace be upon him, was no stranger to Pharaoh and his courtiers. He knew of their oppression, arrogance, and tyranny, and he understood the enormity of the task and the weight of the responsibility. Thus, he turned to his sustainer, expressing his sense of inadequacy, not to shirk the mission, but to seek his aid and support in fulfilling this immense duty. He said, "My sustainer, I fear that they will deny me, and my heart will constrict, and my tongue will not move freely. So send Aaron with me. Moreover, they have a claim against me for a past deed, and I fear they will kill me." Moses' fear was not simply of rejection, but of it occurring at a moment when his heart would tighten, his tongue would falter, and he would be unable to present his case clearly or refute their denial. He suffered from a speech impediment, as mentioned in Taha. "And loosen the knot from my tongue, that they may understand my speech." This impediment could cause frustration from an inability to articulate, intensifying his distress. In such a state, how could he confront a tyrant like Pharaoh and proclaim his sustainer's message? Thus, Moses pleaded with his sustainer, asking him to inspire his brother Aaron to join him in this task, not out of reluctance to fulfill his mission, but to ensure it was carried out fully and without shortcoming. Aaron, being more eloquent, could assist in debate and explanation if Moses' speech faltered. As for Moses' mention of a claim against me, referring to the incident when he killed an Egyptian, this was not a statement of fear for his own life, but a precaution for the mission. If Pharaoh's people killed him, Aaron would continue the divine call, ensuring its continuity as God had commanded. This reflects Moses' concern for the mission, not for himself, a concern that the message might appear weak or be interrupted. Such dedication befits Moses, whom God had prepared and chosen for himself. In response, God granted Moses his requests, reassured him, and firmly dispelled his fears with a decisive word of reassurance. He said, "Nay, go forth both of you with our signs. Indeed, we are with you listening." God's assurance is absolute. Moses' heart will not constrict, nor will his tongue falter. Pharaoh will not kill him, and God's support will accompany them. Thus reassured, Moses and Aaron are sent forth, with God's signs already witnessed by Moses in the staff and the shining hand. The narrative here condenses the details, as the focus in this surah is on the confrontation, the contest with the sorcerers, and the final deliverance. We are with you, listening. What power, what authority, what protection, and what comfort. God's presence is with them in every moment, a companionship that signifies victory and support. Here the Qur'an uses the image of listening as a metaphor for God's intimate care and precise attention, in the inimitable Quranic style of expression through imagery. Go forth, both of you, to Pharaoh, and inform him of your mission without fear or hesitation. Speak to him with clarity and firmness, saying, "We are the messengers of the sustainer of all worlds." Though they are two, they carry but one message, performing one mission as a single envoy, the messengers of the sustainer of all worlds. They are to stand before Pharaoh, who arrogantly claims divinity and proclaims to his people, "I know of no God for you other than myself." Thus, from the very beginning, they are commanded to confront him with the stark truth of monotheism, without prelude, without caution, and without compromise. For the truth of God's oneness cannot be diluted, cannot be deferred. We are the messengers of the sustainer of all worlds, sent to you to demand that you release the children of Israel to go with us. It is evident from this, and from other passages in the Quranic narrative of Moses, peace be upon him, That his message to Pharaoh and his people was not to call them to accept his faith or impose upon them the teachings of his mission. Rather, he was sent to demand the liberation of the children of Israel so that they might worship their sustainer freely as they were meant to. For they were the descendants of Israel Jacob, the father of Joseph, peace be upon them both, who had already been a people of faith. Yet that faith had waned in their hearts. Their beliefs had been corrupted, and so God sent Moses to deliver them from Pharaoh's tyranny and to restore them to the path of monotheism. Thus, we are presented with the scene of the divine commission, the moment of revelation and responsibility. But then the curtain falls, and we are suddenly transported to a scene of confrontation. The Quranic narrative, with its artistry, omits the intermediary details, leading us directly from the charge to the clash. Pharaoh begins, mocking and incredulous, as he recalls Moses' past. "Did we not raise you among us as a child? And did you not spend many years of your life among us? And then you committed that deed of yours, you did what you did, and you are one of the ungrateful," Moses replies, candid yet composed. "I did commit that deed while I was astray, and I fled from you when I feared you. But then my sustainer granted me wisdom and made me one of his messengers. And is this a favor that you now reproach me for, that you enslaved the children of Israel?" Pharaoh is bewildered. Here stands Moses, the very child who was once a ward in his palace, now challenging him with the audacious claim, "We are the messengers of the sustainer of all worlds," and demanding the immense, "Release with us the children of Israel." The last Pharaoh recalls of Moses is his escape from Egypt after killing an Egyptian, a man said to be from Pharaoh's own court, following a quarrel between him and an Israelite. How vast is the distance between that fugitive Moses and this defiant prophet standing before him now. And so Pharaoh begins with mockery, disbelief and disdain. "Did we not raise you among us as a child? And did you not spend many years of your life among us? And then you committed that deed of yours, you did what you did, and you are one of the ungrateful." "Is this," Pharaoh implies, "how you repay the kindness and honor you received in our household? By coming now to oppose our faith and defy the rule of the very house in which you were raised? How could you, having lived among us for so many years, never once speak of this supposed mission of yours? How could you not prepare us for such a grand claim as now you bring?" He then recalls the incident of the Egyptian's death, magnifying it in horror and accusing Moses of ingratitude and betrayal. "You committed that deed, you did what you did, and you are one of the ungrateful." That heinous act, Pharaoh insinuates, is too vile to be described in plain words. How can you now claim to speak of the sustainer of all worlds when once you were guilty of such a crime? Pharaoh gathers all these accusations, believing them to be an unassailable argument against Moses, rendering him speechless and defenseless. Especially does Pharaoh dwell on the matter of the killing, for it carries with it the spectre of retribution and punishment, hanging over Moses like a shadow. But Moses, whose tongue had been unshackled by God in answer to his prayer, responds with calm assurance, "I did commit that deed while I was astray. At that time I was ignorant, driven by tribal loyalty rather than divine conviction. I acted impulsively, not out of the wisdom and clarity of faith that my sustainer has since granted me. I fled from you when I feared you. But then my sustainer granted me wisdom and made me one of his messengers. I am not unique in this. I stand as one among the ranks of those messengers sent by God across the ages." And then Moses counters Pharaoh's taunt with a retort of his own, laced with truth and irony. "And is this a favor that you now reproach me for, that you enslaved the children of Israel? Was it not your oppression of my people, the killing of their sons? The sparing of their daughters that forced my mother to cast me into the river, whereupon you took me in and raised me in your palace? Is this what you now call a favor? Is this the great kindness you boast of?" At this, Pharaoh abandons the personal argument and turns to the core of Moses' claim. Yet even now his tone is one of mockery and disrespect. "And what is this sustainer of all worlds? What," Pharaoh asks, "is this being you speak of?" It is a question dripping with denial, scorn, and incredulity, as though the very concept were absurd, unworthy of serious discussion. Moses answers with dignity and grandeur. The sustainer of the heavens and the earth and all that is between them, if only you would be convinced. He directs Pharaoh's gaze to the vast cosmos, far beyond the reach of Pharaoh's limited dominion. Pharaoh's claim to divinity is but a speck, a fleeting illusion compared to the majesty of the one who governs the heavens and the earth and all that lies between. Moses' words invite reflection, urging Pharaoh and his court to consider the signs around them, to search their hearts for certainty. Pharaoh, however, turns to those around him, seeking to ridicule Moses further and to distract his court from the profound truths they are hearing. Do you not hear? Do you not hear the absurdity of this claim? Do you not see the strangeness of this man's words? But Moses continues, unshaken. He is your sustainer and the sustainer of your forefathers of old. With this, he strikes at the very heart of Pharaoh's pretensions. The sustainer of all worlds is not only your creator, but the creator of your ancestors as well. Pharaoh, who claims to inherit divinity from his forebears, is no more than a servant of the sustainer of all worlds, as were his fathers before him. Pharaoh, sensing the weight of these words and the stirrings they might cause among his people, resorts to mockery once more. Truly, the messenger who has been sent to you is mad. He seeks to dismiss Moses' message by casting doubt on his sanity, hoping to discredit him and prevent his words from taking root in the hearts of his listeners. Yet Moses presses on, undeterred by Pharaoh's scorn. The sustainer of the east and the west and all that is between them, if only you would use your reason. The daily rising and setting of the sun, the eternal rhythm of creation, who but the sustainer of all worlds governs this? Pharaoh's claim to divinity crumbles before such evident truths, for no tyrant, no matter how mighty, can claim dominion over the celestial movements. This final answer shakes Pharaoh to his core, for it touches the hearts of all who hear it. In desperation, Pharaoh abandons reason and resorts to raw intimidation. If you take any god other than me, I will surely imprison you. This is his argument now, threats and coercion. It is the way of all tyrants, ancient and modern, to silence truth when it cannot be refuted, to suppress awakening when it begins to stir. Thus, the confrontation continues, a timeless clash between truth and falsehood, between the liberating message of faith and the suffocating arrogance of tyranny. Yet the threat did not cause Moses to lose his composure, for how could it, when he was the messenger of God? And how could he waver when God was with him and his brother? So, instead of retreating, he opened the very chapter that Pharaoh wished to close, hoping for rest. Moses opened it with a new proclamation and a new proof. Even if I bring you something clear, even if I bring you a clear proof of my truthfulness, would you still imprison me? In this, Moses subtly exposed Pharaoh before the assembled throng. If Pharaoh refused to listen to the evident proof, it would betray his fear of Moses' argument, though he had already claimed that Moses was mad. Thus, Pharaoh found himself compelled to demand the proof. Then bring it, if you are of the truthful. Pharaoh's words were tinged with doubt. If you are truthful in your claim, or if you truly have something clear to show. He continued to cast doubt upon Moses, fearing that his argument might take root in the hearts of the people. And now Moses unveiled his two physical miracles, which he had reserved for this moment when Pharaoh's challenge had reached its peak. So he cast down his staff, and behold, it became a manifest serpent. And he drew out his hand, and lo, it was white to the beholders. The expressions used here indicate that the staff truly transformed into a serpent animated by life, and that his hand, when drawn forth, truly shone white. This is conveyed by the phrase, "Behold, it was so." Thus, it was not an illusion, as is the case with sorcery, which merely manipulates perception and does not alter the inherent nature of things. The miracle of life arising where no one among mankind knows its source is a wonder that occurs every moment. Yet people pay no heed due to its frequency and familiarity, or perhaps they fail to witness it as an explicit challenge. But in a scene such as this, where Moses, peace be upon him, confronted Pharaoh with these two extraordinary signs, the matter shook and struck fear into the hearts of all who witnessed it. Pharaoh, sensing the enormity and power of the miracles, quickly sought to resist and suppress them. Feeling the weakness of his own position, he attempted to pacify those around him, even as he stirred their fears of Moses and his people in order to drown out the impact of the overwhelming miracles. He said to the chiefs around him, "Indeed, this is a knowing sorcerer who seeks to drive you out of your land by his sorcery. So what do you advise?" In these words of Pharaoh there is an implicit acknowledgement of the greatness of the miracles, even as he dismissed them as sorcery. He described Moses as a knowing sorcerer, and his words betrayed his fear that the people might be influenced by Moses' signs. Pharaoh sought to incite them by claiming that Moses intended to drive them out of their land through his sorcery. And here, Pharaoh's own instability and weakness became apparent as he humbled himself before his people, those very people whom he claimed to be his subjects and worshippers seeking their counsel. "So what do you advise?" But when was it that Pharaoh, the self-proclaimed God, ever sought the counsel of his followers, who prostrated themselves before him? Such is the way of tyrants when they feel the ground quake beneath their feet. At such moments they soften their tone after years of arrogance, turning to the very people they once trampled underfoot, pretending to seek their advice, though they had always ruled with selfish whim. But this false humility is only temporary, lasting until the danger passes. Thereafter they return to their oppressive, tyrannical ways. Thus, Pharaoh's chiefs, those deceived by his cunning and complicit in his falsehood, offered him counsel. These men were Pharaoh's partners in tyranny and beneficiaries of the corrupt system that kept them close to power and privilege. They feared that Moses and the children of Israel might prevail and take control of the land if the people followed him after witnessing his miracles. Therefore, they advised Pharaoh to counter Moses' sorcery with similar sorcery after careful preparation and planning. They said, "Postpone the matter of him and his brother, and send forth heralds to the cities to summon every skilled sorcerer." In other words, grant him and his brother a brief respite and send messengers to the great cities of Egypt to gather the most skilled magicians, so they might challenge him in a grand contest of sorcery. Here the curtain falls on this scene, only to rise again on the next, the gathering of the magicians, the assembling of the people for the contest, and the spreading of excitement and fervour in support of the magicians and their backers among the ruling elite. The stage was set for the great confrontation between truth and falsehood, faith and tyranny. And the magicians were assembled for the appointed time on a well-known day. And it was said to the people, "Will you gather so that we might follow the magicians if they are victorious?" The language here vividly conveys the atmosphere of incitement and enthusiasm among the masses. Will you gather? An invitation to come together and not miss the appointed time, to witness the victory of the magicians over Moses the Israelite. Crowds always gather for such spectacles, unaware that their tyrannical rulers are merely toying with them, distracting them with contests, festivals and gatherings to divert their attention from the oppression, suppression and misery they endure. Thus, the Egyptians gathered to witness the contest between Moses, peace be upon him, and the magicians. Then comes the scene of the magicians in Pharaoh's presence before the contest, as they ensure they will be rewarded should they triumph. Pharaoh, in turn, promises them abundant rewards and proximity to his throne. So when the magicians came, they said to Pharaoh, "Will we indeed have a reward if we are the victors?" He said, "Yes, and surely you will be among those near to me." Thus, the situation revealed itself for what it was. A group of hired performers, enlisted by Pharaoh the tyrant, offering their skills in exchange for the reward they sought without any connection to faith, principle, or truth. They were motivated solely by material gain and personal interest. Such are the tools of tyrants in all places and times. Those who sell their souls for worldly gain, aiding oppression without regard for justice or morality. Here they were, ensuring their compensation for their efforts, and here was Pharaoh, promising not merely a reward, but also a place of closeness to him, he, the self-proclaimed king and God. Then comes the climactic scene of the great contest and its momentous events. Moses said to them, "Throw what you will throw." So they threw their ropes and their staffs and said, "By the might of Pharaoh, indeed it is we who will prevail." Then Moses threw his staff, and behold, it devoured what they had fabricated. So the magicians were cast down in prostration. They said, "We believe in the sustainer of all worlds, the sustainer of Moses and Aaron." Pharaoh said, "You believed in him before I gave you permission? Surely he is your leader who taught you sorcery, but you shall soon know. I will surely cut off your hands and feet on opposite sides, and I will crucify you all." They said, "No harm, indeed, to our sustainer we shall return. Indeed, we hope that our sustainer will forgive us our sins, for we were the first to believe." The scene begins with calm and simplicity, as Moses appears assured in the truth he carries, unperturbed by the throngs of magicians summoned from the cities, their utmost skill in sorcery, and the support of Pharaoh and his court, as well as the presence of the deluded, manipulated masses. This assurance is evident in his words, "Throw what you will throw." Even the tone of the statement conveys his indifference and lack of concern. Throw what you will throw, without specifying or showing any particular regard for their efforts. The magicians marshalled all their skill and their most cunning tricks, beginning the contest in the name of Pharaoh and his might. So they threw their ropes and their staffs and said, "By the might of Pharaoh, indeed it is we who will prevail." The narrative does not dwell on the details of their tricks, as it does in other chapters like Al-Araf and Taha, in order to maintain the focus on the serenity and steadfastness of the truth. The account hastens toward the outcome of the contest, the ultimate triumph of truth over falsehood, the inevitable purpose of this chapter. Then Moses threw his staff, and behold, it devoured what they had fabricated. And so the astonishing miracle unfolded a moment that the magicians, skilled as they were, could never have anticipated. They had brought forth the pinnacle of their art, the utmost of their craft, and yet Moses, alone with his staff, overcame them entirely. His staff did not merely appear to swallow theirs, it truly devoured what they had fabricated. Their ropes and staffs were gone, leaving no trace. Had Moses's act been sorcery like theirs, their objects would have remained, for sorcery deceives perception but does not alter reality. Yet here what they had conjured truly disappeared before their very eyes. Then they could not restrain themselves from yielding to the clear truth that admits of no dispute. They were the most knowledgeable among people that it was indeed the truth. And the magicians fell down prostrate, saying, "We have believed in the sustainer of the worlds, the sustainer of Moses and Aaron." They had just a moment before been mercenaries awaiting Pharaoh's reward for their skills, without any doctrine or cause of their own. Yet the truth that touched their hearts transformed them utterly. A great tremor seized them, and they were shaken to their very core. It reached into the depths of their souls and the innermost recesses of their hearts, clearing away the debris of falsehood, making them pure, alive, and humbled before the truth, filled with faith in a matter of mere moments. Suddenly they found themselves prostrating against their own will, their tongues moving to proclaim the word of faith with clarity and eloquence. "We have believed in the sustainer of the worlds, the sustainer of Moses and Aaron." Indeed, the human heart is a wondrous thing, for a single touch at the right place can bring about a profound transformation. The messenger of God, peace be upon him, said, "There is no heart except that it is between two fingers of the merciful. If he wills, he establishes it, and if he wills, he leads it astray." Thus the magicians, once mercenaries, became among the choicest of believers, in full view of the assembled multitude and Pharaoh and his entourage. They did not think of what consequences would follow their open declaration of faith in the face of the tyrant, nor did they care what he might do or say. This sudden transformation must have struck Pharaoh and his court like a thunderbolt. The crowds were vast, having been rallied by Pharaoh's agents who had stirred them with the falsehood that Moses the Israelite was a sorcerer, seeking to drive them from their land with his magic and to establish his rule over his people, that the magicians would defeat him and silence him. Yet there they were, witnessing the magicians throwing down their staffs in the name of Pharaoh and his might, only to confess their defeat and acknowledge the truth of Moses' message which he brought from God. They declared their faith in the sustainer of the worlds, who sent him shedding the yoke of Pharaoh, having been, just a moment before, his soldiers, awaiting their reward, revelling in his might. This was a revolution that threatened Pharaoh's throne, for it undermined the religious myth upon which that throne rested, the myth of divinity or sonship to the gods, as was common in certain eras. And these were the magicians, for magic was a sacred craft practiced only by the priests of temples throughout the land. Here they were, believing in the sustainer of the worlds, the sustainer of Moses and Aaron, while the crowds continued to follow the priests in their beliefs that led them astray. What remains of Pharaoh's throne if not force? And force alone without a creed does not uphold a throne nor protect a rule. We must appreciate the terror that gripped Pharaoh at this unexpected turn of events and the alarm of those around him if we consider this truth. The faith of the magicians, a faith that was open, clear, and overwhelming, leaving them with no choice but to fall prostrate in confession and repentance. Then Pharaoh's fury knew no bounds, and he resorted to the loathsome threats of punishment and torment after attempting to accuse the magicians of conspiring against him and the people alongside Moses. "Did you believe in him before I gave you permission?" he exclaimed. "He is indeed your chief who taught you magic. You shall surely know. I will cut off your hands and feet in opposite directions, and I will crucify you all." "Did you believe in him before I gave you permission?" He did not say, "Did you believe in him?" but rather counted it as submission to him before his consent, in the manner of a schemer who is in control of his will, aware of his aim, and calculating of the consequences. His heart did not feel that touch which had reached their hearts. And when have tyrants ever had hearts that could feel such illuminating touches? He hastened to accuse them to justify this grave upheaval. "He is indeed your chief who taught you magic." This strange accusation can only be explained by the fact that some of these magicians who were among the priests had been responsible for raising Moses in Pharaoh's palace during the time he was adopted, or he had visited them in the temples. Pharaoh thus clung to this distant connection and twisted the matter, claiming instead that he was their senior, inflating the situation's gravity in the eyes of the crowds. Then he began to threaten them with severe punishments after his exaggerations about what awaited the believers. "You shall surely know. I will cut off your hands and feet in opposite directions, and I will crucify you all." This is the folly that every tyrant commits when he senses danger to his throne or his person, committed with violence, harshness, and brutality, without remorse of heart or conscience. This is the word of Pharaoh, the arrogant tyrant who possesses the power to execute his threats. What could be the worth of the words of the believing faction that has seen the light? It is the word of a heart that has found God, no longer caring for what it may lose after this profound realization. A heart that has connected with God and tasted the flavor of honor, no longer fearing tyranny. A heart that hopes for the hereafter, indifferent to the affairs of this world, whether much or little. They said, "No harm. Indeed, we are returning to our sustainer. We hope that our sustainer will forgive us our sins, for we were the first of the believers." No harm. No harm in having our hands and feet cut off in opposite directions. No harm in crucifixion and torment. No harm in death and martyrdom. No harm. Indeed, we are returning to our sustainer. Let whatever happens on this earth happen, for our aspiration is that our sustainer will forgive us our sins, as we were the first of the believers, as we were the pioneers. Oh, how magnificent is faith as it shines forth in the depths of consciousness, as it overflows into souls, as it brings tranquility to hearts, as it elevates the offspring of clay to the highest heights, as it fills hearts with abundance, wealth, and plenty, until everything in this world appears trivial, despicable, and inexpensive. Here the narrative draws the curtain on this overwhelming magnificence, adding nothing more, allowing the scene to maintain its splendid majesty and profound rhythm. It nurtures souls in Mecca as they face hardship, suffering, and distress, and it cultivates every bearer of a doctrine confronting tyranny, oppression, and torture. But after this, God takes care of his believing servants, while Pharaoh plots and gathers all his forces. And we revealed to Moses, "Set forth with my servants, indeed you will be pursued." Pharaoh sent messengers into the cities, rallying them. "Indeed, these are but a small band, and they have enraged us, and we are all cautious of them." Here there is a gap in the events and time that is not mentioned in this context. For Moses and the children of Israel lived through a period after the contest, during which other signs occurred as mentioned in Surah Al-Araf, before God revealed to Moses to depart with his people. However, the context here omits these details to reach the fitting conclusion of the surah and its profound direction. And thus God revealed to Moses that he should journey by night with his servants to depart with them under the cover of darkness after careful planning and preparation. He informed him that Pharaoh would pursue them with his armies, and commanded him to lead his people to the shores of the sea, most likely where the Gulf of Suez meets the region of the lakes. And Pharaoh learned of the secret departure of the children of Israel, and so he ordered a so-called general mobilization and sent heralds to the cities to gather troops, so that he might overtake Moses and his people and thwart their plans. Little did he know that this was the plan of the master planner. Pharaoh's agents set out to rally the forces, yet this mobilization itself betrayed Pharaoh's unease. It hinted at the power of Moses and those with him, and the magnitude of the threat they posed so much, so that the divine king, as Pharaoh claimed to be, felt the need to declare a state of emergency. Thus, there arose a need to downplay the significance of the believers. Indeed, these are but a small band. So why then all this attention to their matter, and why such a massive mobilization against them, if indeed they are but a small and insignificant group? And indeed they have enraged us, for they stir anger and frustration with their deeds and words, provoking and defying. Thus, even in this they are of consequence and pose a threat. And so Pharaoh's agents were instructed to say, "This is of no importance, for we are ready for them." And indeed we are ever alert. We are vigilant against their schemes, prepared for their movements, maintaining control over all matters. It is the eternal confusion of arrogant falsehood when faced with the steadfast believers who uphold their faith. Before presenting the final scene, the narrative hastens to reveal the ultimate outcome: the expulsion of Pharaoh and his elite from their life of luxury and the inheritance of their wealth and blessings by the downtrodden children of Israel. Thus, we expelled them from gardens and springs, treasures and a noble station. So it was, and we made the children of Israel inherit them. They had set out, following in the footsteps of Moses and his people, tracing their path. Yet this departure was to be their last. It was an expulsion from all the gardens, springs, treasures, and noble positions they had enjoyed. Never again would they return to this life of ease and privilege. And so, this final fate is mentioned directly after their pursuit of the believers, as a swift recompense for their oppression, arrogance, and the dire consequences of their transgressions. And we made the children of Israel inherit them. It is not known that the children of Israel returned to Egypt after their exodus to the Holy Land, nor that they inherited Egypt's kingship, Pharaoh's treasures, or his noble station. Hence, the commentators explain that what is meant here is that they inherited a life similar to what Pharaoh and his elite had: gardens, springs, treasures, and noble stations. It is an inheritance of a kind, rather than a literal inheritance of Pharaoh's possessions. And after this preparatory note, the narrative turns to the decisive climactic scene. So they pursued them at sunrise. And when the two groups saw one another, the companions of Moses said, "We are surely overtaken." He said, "No, indeed, my sustainer is with me, and he will guide me." Then we inspired Moses, "Strike the sea with your staff." And it parted, and each side was like a great mountain. And we brought the others close, and we saved Moses and those with him altogether. Then we drowned the others. Moses had led God's servants on their night journey by God's command and plan, but at dawn Pharaoh's troops pursued them, driven by Pharaoh's arrogance and pride. And here now is the moment when the scene approaches its conclusion and the confrontation reaches its climax. Moses and his people stand before the sea, with no ships to carry them across, no means to traverse it, and no weapons to defend themselves. Behind them, Pharaoh and his army, armed and merciless, draw near. Everything in the circumstances pointed to an inescapable fate, the sea before them and the enemy behind them. The companions of Moses said, "We are surely overtaken." The anguish reached its peak, and it was but a matter of moments before death would descend upon them, leaving no escape and no helper. But Moses, who had received revelation from his sustainer, did not doubt for a single instant. His heart was filled with trust in his sustainer, certainty in his aid, and assurance of salvation, even if he did not know how it would come to pass, for it would surely come. God was the one guiding and protecting him. He said, "No, indeed, my sustainer is with me, and he will guide me." "No," uttered with strength and certainty. "No, we will not be overtaken. No, we will not perish. No, we will not be defeated. No, we will not be lost. No, indeed, my sustainer is with me, and he will guide me." Such was his resolute conviction and unwavering certainty. And in the last moment a ray of light pierced the darkness of despair and anguish. A path to salvation opened from where they least expected. Then we inspired Moses, "Strike the sea with your staff." The narrative does not pause to mention that Moses struck the sea with his staff, for this is understood. Instead, it hastens to reveal the result. And it parted, and each side was like a great mountain. The miracle occurred. What people deemed impossible became a reality, for they measure God's laws by their limited, familiar experiences. Yet God, who created these laws, is fully capable of shaping them according to his will whenever he so chooses. The miracle unfolded. The waters split apart, revealing a pathway, with the waters standing like mighty mountains on either side. The children of Israel rushed forward along the path, and Pharaoh and his army stood astounded, stunned by this extraordinary scene, this astonishing event. Surely he must have stood bewildered, delaying for a time, watching Moses and his people traverse the sea on this exposed path, before commanding his troops to charge in pursuit along this miraculous way. But God's plan had been set. The children of Israel crossed to the other shore, while Pharaoh and his soldiers, gathered together between the walls of water, were drawn towards their inevitable fate. And we brought the others close, and we saved Moses and those with him altogether. Then we drowned the others. And so an enduring sign was established in the annals of time, a sign that generations would recount. But how many would believe in it? Indeed, in that is a sign, yet most of them were not believers. For such extraordinary signs do not necessarily lead to faith, even if people are compelled to acknowledge them outwardly. True faith is a light that God places in hearts, and indeed, your sustainer is the mighty, the merciful. Thus comes the familiar conclusion of the Surah, a reminder of God's might and mercy following the presentation of the signs and the persistent denial of the truth, and recite to them the story of Abraham when he said to his father and his people, "What is it that you worship?" They said, "We worship idols, and we remain devoted to them." He said, "Do they hear you when you call upon them? Or do they benefit you or harm you?" They said, "No, but we found our forefathers doing the same." He said, "Have you then considered what you have been worshipping, you and your forefathers of old? Indeed, they are enemies to me, except the sustainer of all worlds, he who created me, and it is he who guides me. And it is he who gives me food and drink. And when I fall ill, it is he who heals me. And it is he who causes me to die and then resurrects me. And it is he from whom I hope will forgive my sins on the day of judgment. My sustainer, grant me wisdom and join me with the righteous. And grant me a reputation of truthfulness among later generations. And make me among the inheritors of the garden of bliss. And forgive my father, for he was among the misguided. And do not disgrace me on the day they are resurrected, the day when neither wealth nor children will benefit anyone except for the one who comes to God with a sound heart. And the garden will be brought close for the righteous, and the fire will be made visible to the misguided. And it will be said to them, "Where are those whom you used to worship besides God? Can they help you or help themselves?" Then they will be thrown into it, they and the misguided, and the soldiers of Iblis all together. They will say as they dispute within it, "By God, we were indeed in manifest error when we equated you with the sustainer of all worlds, and none led us astray except the evildoers. So now we have no intercessors nor any close friend. If only we could have another turn, we would be among the believers. Indeed, in this is a sign, yet most of them are not believers. And indeed, your sustainer is the Almighty, the most merciful. The story of Moses, peace be upon him, with Pharaoh and his people has concluded. It ended with a message of glad tidings for the oppressed believers, just as the small band of believers in Mecca were at that time, and with destruction for the tyrants, whose stance was much like that of the polytheists. Now the story of Abraham, peace be upon him, and his people follows. The messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, is commanded to recite it to the polytheists, for they claim to be the heirs of Abraham and to follow his ancient faith, while they worship idols and erect them in the sacred house that Abraham built purely for God. So recite to them the story of Abraham, so they may discern the truth of their claims. The stories in this chapter do not follow a historical sequence, for the intent here is to draw lessons. In contrast, for example, the historical sequence was emphasized in Surah Al-Araf to illustrate the succession of generations inheriting the earth and the continuity of messengers from the time of Adam, peace be upon him. There, the narrative followed the historical timeline, beginning with the descent from paradise and the start of human life. The episode presented here from the story of Abraham, peace be upon him, focuses on his message to his people, his dialogue with them regarding faith, his rejection of their false gods, his call to worship the one God, and his reminder of the day of resurrection. This is followed by a vivid scene from the day of judgment, where the worshippers disown their false gods and lament their idolatry, which led them to their torment, as though they have already arrived at their fate. Here lies the lesson for the polytheists, and thus the narrative emphasizes the foundations of monotheism, the corruption of idolatry, and the destiny of the idolaters on the day of judgment. These themes are expanded upon, while other details elaborated in other chapters are condensed here. Episodes from the story of Abraham, peace be upon him, are also mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-An'am, Surah Hud, Surah Ibrahim, Surah Al-Hijr, Surah Maryam, Surah Al-Anbiya, and Surah Al-Hajj. In each chapter, the episodes align with the overarching themes, context, and atmosphere of the chapter. In Surah Al-Baqarah, for instance, the narrative includes Abraham and Ishmael building the sacred house, their supplication for God to make the sacred land secure, and his declaration that the inheritance of the house and his legacy belongs to the Muslims who follow his creed, not to those who merely claim lineage. This is presented in the context of the deviations of the children of Israel, their rejection and curse, and the transfer of Abraham's legacy and faith to the Muslims. Surah Al-Baqarah also recounts Abraham's debate with the disbelieving king about the nature of God, who gives life and causes death, and his challenge to the king to bring the sun from the west if he claims to have power equal to God, leaving the king utterly confounded. Additionally, it narrates Abraham's request for God to show him how he gives life to the dead, and God's command for him to slaughter 4 birds, scatter their parts across the mountains, and then witness them return to life before his very eyes, walking toward him. These episodes are presented in the context of the chapter's discussion on God's signs and his power over life and death. In Surah Al-An'am, another episode is presented, Abraham's search for his sustainer as he reflects on the stars, the moon and the sun, ultimately recognizing the one creator after contemplating the signs of the universe. This aligns with the chapter's focus on faith, God's signs in creation, and their testimony to the existence of the one peerless creator. In Surah Hud, there is presented the episode of the glad tidings given to Abraham regarding Isaac, and this is set in the context of the story of Lot, as the angels destined to destroy his people passed by Abraham on their way. In this depiction, the care of God for his chosen servants shines forth, along with the destruction of those who transgress. In Surah Ibrahim, the episode of Abraham's supplication is recounted, as he stood beside the sacred house, praying for those among his progeny whom he had settled in a barren valley. He gave thanks to his sustainer for granting him in his old age Ishmael and Isaac, and he beseeched his sustainer to make him and his descendants steadfast in prayer, to accept his supplications, and to forgive him, his parents, and all believers on the day of reckoning. The entire surah is centered around the portrayal of the community of messengers, united in their single message of monotheism, and the depiction of those who denied this community, standing as one in their rejection. It is as though the message is a tree of shade, offering relief in the scorching heat of disbelief and the barren desert of ingratitude. In Surah Al-Hijr, the same episode presented in Surah Hud is recounted, though with greater detail, and it is mentioned in the context of God's mercy upon his believing servants and his punishment of the sinful and disobedient. In Surah Maryam, the episode of Abraham's gentle counsel to his father and his father's harshness towards him is narrated. It recounts Abraham's withdrawal from his father and his people, and God's grant to him of Ishmael and Isaac. This is told within a surah that portrays God's care for his chosen servants, with a tone of mercy, affection, and gentleness pervading it all. In Surah Al-Anbiya, the episode of Abraham's call to his father and his people is recounted as he derided their idols, destroyed them, and was cast into the fire, which by God's command became coolness and safety for him. He and his nephew Lot were delivered to the land which we have blessed for all beings. This comes in the general context of illustrating the community of messengers, God's care for this community, and their orientation towards the worship of the one God who has no partner. In Surah Al-Hajj, there is a reference to the command to purify the sacred house for those who circumambulate it and dedicate themselves to devotion, and recite to them the story of Abraham when he said to his father and his people, "What is it that you worship?" Recite to them the story of Abraham, whom they claim as their forefather and whose faith they profess to follow. Recount to them how he denounced what his father and people worshipped, those idols, akin to the very idols now worshipped by the polytheists of Mecca. He opposed his father and his people in their idolatry, expressing amazement and disdain as he asked them, "What is it that you worship?" They replied, "We worship idols, and we remain devoted to them." These idols, which they called gods, were openly acknowledged by them to be mere statues. Their confession that these were idols implies that they couldn't deny their being mere lifeless carved stones. Yet despite this, they devoted themselves to them in worship and servitude. What utter folly! But when belief strays, its adherents become blind to the depths of degradation their worship, imaginings, and utterances have sunk to. Abraham then sought to awaken their slumbering hearts and stir their dulled minds, drawing their attention to the absurdity of their actions, which they carried out without awareness or reflection. He asked, "Do they hear you when you call upon them? Or do they benefit you or harm you?" Surely even the most basic attribute of a deity worthy of worship is that it must possess hearing, as its worshippers, in their devotion and supplication, call upon it. Yet these idols neither hear the voices of those who worship them nor respond to their invocations for benefit or harm. If they are deaf and unresponsive, how could they possess the power to bring benefit or harm? They have neither of these attributes, and thus cannot be called upon as deities. The people had no answer to these questions, for they could not deny that Abraham was mocking and denouncing their beliefs. They had no arguments to refute his reasoning, and when they spoke, they revealed the rigidity of those who blindly follow tradition without thought or reflection. But we found our forefathers doing the same. These idols neither hear nor benefit nor harm, yet they persisted in worshipping them simply because their forefathers had done so. It was a shameful response, but the polytheists felt no shame in uttering it, just as the idolaters of Mecca felt no shame in doing the same. For them, the actions of their forefathers were sufficient justification, requiring no further inquiry. Indeed, one of the greatest barriers to Islam for the Meccan polytheists was that embracing it would require them to abandon the religion of their ancestors, which would mean acknowledging their forefathers' error, and this, in their eyes, was unthinkable. Thus, hollow considerations like these stood in the way of truth, causing them to prefer falsehood over truth in times of intellectual and spiritual stagnation. Such periods of decline require a powerful jolt to restore people to freedom, clarity, and independent thought. Faced with this stubborn rigidity, Abraham, despite his gentleness and patience, found no alternative but to shake them forcefully. He declared his enmity towards their idols and the corrupt beliefs that sanctioned their worship, rejecting the hollow excuses they clung to. "Do you see what you and your forefathers have been worshipping? They are enemies to me, except for the sustainer of the worlds." Thus, Abraham did not let the fact that his father and his people worshipped these idols prevent him from dissociating himself from their beliefs and openly declaring his opposition to their gods and their creed, as well as to the forefathers who shared in this idolatry, even though these forefathers were his own ancestors. The Quran thus teaches believers that there can be no compromise in matters of faith, not even for a parent or one's people. The primary bond is the bond of faith, and the supreme value is that of belief in God. All other ties are secondary and derive their worth only in relation to faith. Abraham, however, made an exception for the sustainer of the worlds in his declaration of enmity, saying, "They are enemies to me, except for the sustainer of the worlds." Perhaps among their forefathers were those who had worshipped God before the people's beliefs became corrupted and deviated from the truth. Or perhaps some of them had worshipped God but associated other false deities with him. This careful wording reflects Abraham's precision and consciousness in speaking about matters of faith, a precision befitting a prophet of his stature. Abraham then began to describe his sustainer, the sustainer of all worlds, and the intimate bond he felt with him in every circumstance and moment. One can sense the closeness and connection, the awareness of God's hand in every motion and breath, in every need and aspiration. He who created me and guides me, and he who gives me food and drink. And when I fall ill, it is he who heals me, and he who causes me to die, and then restores me to life, and he whom I hope will forgive my sins on the day of judgment. In Abraham's description of his sustainer and his heartfelt portrayal of his bond with him, one perceives a soul that lives fully in the presence of its Creator, turning to him with confidence, love, and devotion. He describes his sustainer as though he beholds him, feeling the touch of his grace and bounty in every fibre of his being. The gentle rhythm of the Quranic verses amplifies this atmosphere, casting a serene and tender light through their melodious and flowing cadence. The one who has created me, and it is he who guides me. The one who brought me into existence, knowing the essence of my being while I remain unaware. For he alone knows my innermost nature, my composition, my functions, my feelings, my condition, and my ultimate destiny. Thus it is he who guides me to him, to my path, and to the way I must tread. It is as though Abraham, peace be upon him, feels himself to be like pliable clay in the hands of the master craftsman, who moulds him as he wills, into whatever form he desires. It is a state of absolute surrender, infused with tranquility, comfort, trust, and certainty, and the one who gives me food and drink. And when I fall ill, it is he who heals me. This is a direct, tender, and compassionate care, a care that is nurturing, watchful, and loving, felt by Abraham in both health and sickness. Yet, observe the refined etiquette of prophethood. Abraham does not attribute his illness to his sustainer, even though he knows that it is by his will that he falls ill and recovers. Instead, he mentions his sustainer only in the context of blessings and grace. He who provides him with food and drink and who heals him when he is sick, while refraining from attributing the trial of illness directly to God. And the one who causes me to die and then brings me back to life. This is faith in God as the one who decrees death and the one who brings forth resurrection and renewal, accepted in complete surrender and profound contentment, and the one in whom I hope will forgive my sins on the day of judgment. The utmost aspiration of Abraham, peace be upon him, the prophet and messenger who knows his sustainer with such intimacy, who feels his nearness so deeply, and who is profoundly aware of his presence, is no more than to hope for God's forgiveness of his sins on the day of judgment. He does not claim innocence for himself, nor does he assume that he is free of sin. He does not rely on his deeds, nor does he see himself as deserving anything by virtue of them. Instead, he places his hope solely in the grace of his sustainer, seeking his mercy. This alone inspires his longing for pardon and forgiveness. This is the sentiment of true piety, of refined humility, and of a deep sense of reverence. It is the proper awareness of the magnitude of God's blessings, which are indescribably great, and the insignificance of a servant's deeds, which are painfully small. Thus, Abraham gathers within his description of his sustainer the essential elements of true faith: the oneness of God, the sustainer of all worlds, the acknowledgement of God's control over the minutest details of human life on earth, the certainty of resurrection and judgment after death, the recognition of God's infinite grace, and the acknowledgement of human inadequacy. These are the very truths that his people and the polytheists deny. Then Abraham, the tender-hearted, penitent servant, turns to his sustainer in a supplication that flows gently and abundantly, filled with faith and humility. O my sustainer, grant me wisdom and unite me with the righteous, and grant me a reputation of honor among the later generations, and make me among the inheritors of the garden of bliss. And forgive my father, for he was among those who went astray, and do not disgrace me on the day they are resurrected, the day when neither wealth nor children will avail, but only one who comes to God with a pure heart. This prayer contains no request for any of the fleeting pleasures of this world, not even for physical well-being. It is a prayer directed toward higher realms, stirred by purer emotions. It is the plea of a heart that has come to know God and now holds everything else in disdain. A heart that has tasted the sweetness of faith and yearns for more. A heart that hopes and fears in accordance with what it has experienced and what it seeks. Grant me wisdom. Imbue me with the wisdom through which I may discern true values from false ones, that I may remain on the path which connects me to what is everlasting. And unite me with the righteous. This is spoken by Abraham, the noble prophet, tender-hearted and forbearing. What humility, what reverence, what fear of falling short, what apprehension of the fickleness of hearts, and what yearning to simply join the ranks of the righteous. All of this expressed in a plea to be guided by his sustainer toward deeds of righteousness that would place him among the righteous, and grant me a reputation of honor among the later generations. This is a plea driven by the desire for his message to endure not through lineage, but through faith. He asks his sustainer to grant him a legacy of truth among those who come after him, a voice that calls them to the truth, drawing them back to the tolerant monotheism, the religion of Abraham. Perhaps this is the same plea he made in another instance, when he and his son Ishmael raised the foundations of the sacred house and said, "Our sustainer, make us submissive to you and from our progeny, a nation submissive to you, and show us our rights and turn to us in mercy. Truly, you are the most forgiving, most merciful. And our sustainer, raise among them a messenger from among themselves, who shall recite to them your revelations, teach them the book and wisdom, and purify them. Truly, you are the Almighty, the wise." God answered his prayer, fulfilling his plea and granting him an enduring legacy of truth among the later generations. He raised among them a messenger from their own people, who recited to them his verses, taught them the book and wisdom, and purified them. This response came after thousands of years, a span that seems long to human perception, but is, for God, a predetermined term, dictated by his wisdom. And make me among the inheritors of the garden of bliss. He had already asked his sustainer to join him with the righteous, by guiding him to good deeds that would place him among their ranks. The garden of bliss is inherited by God's righteous servants. And forgive my father, for he was among those who went astray. This, despite the harsh words and severe threats Abraham, peace be upon him, had received from his father. Yet Abraham had promised to seek forgiveness for him, and so he fulfilled his promise. Later, the Qur'an clarified that it is not permissible to seek forgiveness for polytheists, even if they are close kin, and explained that Abraham's plea for his father was based on a promise he had made. But when it became clear to him that he was an enemy to God, he disassociated himself from him. Abraham came to understand that true kinship is not based on blood, but on faith. This is one of the clear principles of Islamic upbringing. The primary bond is the bond of faith in God, and no relationship between human beings can endure except on this foundation. If this bond is severed, all other ties are rendered meaningless and void. And do not disgrace me on the day they are resurrected, the day when neither wealth nor children will avail, but only one who comes to God with a pure heart. From Abraham's words, do not disgrace me on the day they are resurrected. We sense the depth of his awareness of the enormity of the last day, his profound modesty before his sustainer, his fear of disgrace in his presence, and his concern over his own shortcomings, even though he is the noble prophet. From his words, the day when neither wealth nor children will avail, but only one who comes to God with a pure heart, we perceive his understanding of the reality of that day and his grasp of true values. Nothing will carry any weight on that day except sincerity, the complete devotion of the heart to God, free from all impurities, diseases, and ulterior motives. A heart purified from desires and deviations, detached from anything other than God. This is the purity that gives it worth and weight on the day when neither wealth nor children will avail. All the fleeting false values that people vie for in this world will amount to nothing in the final reckoning. Here, the Surah paints a scene of the day of judgment, the day Abraham fears as if it is unfolding before our eyes, as he turns to his sustainer in humble penitent supplication. And paradise shall be brought near to the God-conscious, and hellfire shall be unveiled for the misguided. And it will be said to them, where are those whom you worship besides God? Can they help you or help themselves? Then they will be hurled headlong into it, they and the misguided ones, and the hosts of Iblis altogether. They will say, while disputing therein, by God, we were indeed in manifest error when we equated you with the sustainer of all worlds. It was only the evildoers who led us astray. Now we have no intercessors, nor any close friend. If only we could have another chance, we would be among the believers. Paradise is brought close, displayed for the God-conscious, who were ever fearful of their sustainer's punishment. And hell is unveiled, fully exposed to the misguided who had strayed from the path and denied the day of judgment. There they stand, face to face with hell, hearing the reproach before being cast into its depths. They're interrogated about what they used to worship other than God, a continuation of Abraham's dialogue with his people about their idols. They are asked, where are those whom you worshipped besides God? Can they help you or help themselves? But there is no answer, nor is one expected. The question is not meant to elicit a response, but to deepen their humiliation and reproach. Then they're flung into hell, them and their idols, alongside all those who led them astray and the hosts of Iblis. The sound of their tumbling into the abyss reverberates in the word flung, kubiku, vividly capturing the chaos and clamour of their fall, as though we can hear the crashing and crumbling of their descent. In the depths of hell, they turn to their idols, lamenting, by God, we were indeed in manifest error when we equated you with the sustainer of all worlds. Too late, they acknowledge their folly, equating their idols with the creator of the universe. They place the blame on the evildoers who led them astray, but even this realization avails them nothing. They see now that there are no intercessors, no friends to comfort them, and in desperation they cry, if only we could have another chance, we would be among the believers. But it is no more than a futile wish. There is no return, no intercession, for this is the day of judgment. Then comes the familiar refrain. Behold, in this there is a message indeed, but most of them would not believe. And verily thy sustainer, he alone is almighty, a dispenser of grace. This is the same refrain that appears in the Surah after recounting the fates of the people of Raf within the historical framework of prophets and their messages following Adam's descent from paradise. There, it was narrated briefly, summarizing his call to his people to worship the one God, his warning of the punishment of a great day, their accusation that he was astray, their astonishment that God would send a human being among them as a messenger, and their ultimate rejection of him, culminating in their destruction and his deliverance along with those who believed, without much detail. In Surah Yunus, it was likewise narrated in a succinct manner, focusing on the culmination of his mission, his challenge to his people, their rejection of him, and then his salvation along with those who were with him in the ark while the others were drowned. In Surah Hud, the story is recounted in greater detail, describing the flood, the ark, and the events after the deluge, including Noah's prayer regarding his son, who was among those drowned, and the exchanges between him and his people concerning monotheism. In Surah Al-Mu'minun, the account highlights his call to his people to worship the one God, their objection to him on the grounds that he was merely a human being, seeking to gain superiority over them, their insistence that had God willed, he would have sent down angels, and their accusation that Noah was possessed. It also alludes briefly to his prayer for divine support, the ark and the flood. The story of Noah is often presented in conjunction with the narratives of Ad, Thamud, Lot, and the people of Midian, as it is in this surah. What stands out most in the episode recounted here is Noah's call to his people to be conscious of God, his declaration that he sought no reward from them for guiding them, and his refusal to cast out the poor believers whom the arrogant leaders of his people despised. This mirrors the experiences of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, in Mecca, where he faced similar demands and challenges. Finally, the story culminates with Noah's prayer for divine judgment and God's response, the destruction of the deniers and the deliverance of the believers. The people of Noah denied the messengers. This is the end of the story. Its conclusion is stated right at the outset to emphasize its significance before the details are unfolded. Now, the people of Noah had denied none but Noah himself. Yet the Qur'an declares that they denied all the messengers. This is because the message at its core is one and the same, the call to the oneness of God and the sincerity of devotion to Him alone. Whoever rejects this message has, in essence, denied all the messengers, for theirs was a united call to the same truth. The Quran repeatedly emphasizes and affirms this notion in various forms and expressions, for it is one of the foundational principles of the Islamic creed. It gathers all divine missions into one universal call, dividing humanity into two camps, the camp of faith and the camp of disbelief, stretching across all ages and epochs of human history. Thus, the Muslim perceives that the community of believers, no matter their faith or creed, as long as it originates from God, is his community. From the dawn of time to the advent of Islam, the final religion of monotheism, all the believers are united in one cause. On the other side stands the camp of the disbelievers, encompassing all those who reject faith, regardless of their nation or creed. The believer then affirms his faith in all the messengers and respects them equally, for all of them carried the same message, the message of divine oneness. In the worldview of the Muslim, humanity is not divided by race, color, or homeland. Instead, it is divided into the people of truth and the people of falsehood. The Muslim stands with the people of truth against the people of falsehood in every time and in every place. Thus, the Muslim scale of judgment becomes unified across the entirety of history. His values are elevated beyond the narrow confines of racial, linguistic, or national loyalties, beyond even bonds of kinship, whether immediate or rooted deep in the past. One value alone emerges supreme, the value of faith, by which all are judged and through which all are measured. The people of Noah denied the messengers when their brother Noah said to them, "Will you not be conscious of God? I am a trustworthy messenger sent to you, so be conscious of God and obey me, and I ask you for no reward. My reward is with none but the sustainer of all worlds, so be conscious of God and obey me." This was the call of Noah which his people rejected. He was their brother, and one would have expected the bonds of brotherhood to lead them to peace, reassurance, faith, and acceptance. Yet his people paid no heed to this bond, and their hearts did not soften to the call of their brother Noah when he said to them, "Will you not be conscious of God? Will you not fear the consequences of the path you tread? Will you not let your hearts be filled with awe and reverence for God?" This call to God consciousness recurs throughout this surah. It is the same call that God instructed Moses to convey to Pharaoh and his people, and it is the same call that Noah delivered to his people, and the same call that every messenger after Noah delivered to their people. "I am a trustworthy messenger sent to you." a messenger who does not betray, deceive, or mislead, who alters nothing of the message entrusted to him, neither adding to it nor omitting from it. So be conscious of God and obey me. Again, Noah reminds them of God consciousness, this time explicitly connecting it to God himself, seeking to awaken their hearts to obedience and submission. He then reassures them regarding worldly concerns, making it clear that he asks for no material gain in return for his call. He seeks no reward from them for guiding them to God, for his reward lies with the sustainer of all worlds, who entrusted him with this mission. This reminder of the absence of any worldly motives appears to have been a necessary aspect of every true call to God, distinguishing it from the practices of soothsayers and corrupt priests who exploited religion to amass wealth and power. Throughout history, these deviants turned religion into a tool of extortion, using various methods to strip people of their resources. In stark contrast, the true messengers of God were always selfless, seeking no recompense for their guidance, for their reward rested with the sustainer of all worlds. Once more Noah repeats his call, "So be conscious of God and obey me." But his people respond with a strange objection, one often repeated throughout human history in the face of every messenger. They said, "Shall we believe in you when it is the lowliest among us who follow you?" By the lowliest, they meant the poor, those who are frequently the first to respond to the messengers and their calls. These are the ones who are not blinded by empty pride or preoccupied with safeguarding positions, wealth, or status. Thus, they are the first to submit and believe. As for the elites, their arrogance and vested interests, rooted in false systems upheld by myths and illusions cloaked in the guise of religion, keep them from accepting the truth. They disdain the idea of being made equal by pure monotheism with the common people, for it strips all false values and elevates one value alone: faith and righteous action, a value that raises some and lowers others according to one measure alone, the measure of belief and upright conduct. To this, Noah responds with a reply that establishes eternal truths, defines the role of the messenger, and entrusts the judgment of people and their deeds to God alone. He said, "And what knowledge do I have of what they used to do? Their reckoning is with none but my sustainer, if only you could perceive, and I shall not drive away the believers. I am but a plain warner." The elites always claim that the habits and manners of the poor are unrefined, incompatible with the delicate sensibilities of the upper class. But Noah reminds them that he demands nothing of people except faith, and these people have believed. As for their past deeds, these are left to God, who alone weighs and judges them, rewarding the good and punishing the bad. Only God's judgment is true, if only you could perceive the values that hold weight in his scales. I am but a plain warner. When Noah confronted them with his clear argument and straightforward reasoning, and they found themselves unable to counter him with evidence or proof, they resorted to what every tyrant turns to when stripped of argument and logic: brute force. They threatened him with the raw power that tyrants across all times and places wield when they are defeated by truth and reason. They said, "If you do not desist, O Noah, you shall surely be stoned." Thus, tyranny revealed its hideous face, and falsehood showed its oppressive means. Noah understood that their hardened hearts would not soften. At this point, Noah turned to the only ally, the only supporter, the refuge of all who believe. He said, "My sustainer, my people have denied me, so judge decisively between me and them, and save me and the believers with me." Though his sustainer knew that his people had rejected him, Noah found solace in pouring out his complaint to the helper and supporter, seeking justice and entrusting the matter to the one who holds all affairs. "Judge decisively between me and them, and save me and the believers with me." God responded to his prophet, who was threatened by tyranny for calling people to God consciousness and obedience, even though he sought no reward, wealth, or status. "So we saved him and those with him in the laden ark. Then we drowned the rest." Thus, in swift and vivid strokes, the Qur'an portrays the final outcome of the battle between faith and tyranny at the dawn of human history, establishing the fate of every subsequent battle throughout the ages. And then comes the refrain, repeated throughout this surah after every sign of God, the Almighty, the Merciful. Indeed, in this is a sign, yet most of them do not believe. And indeed, your sustainer is truly the Almighty, the Merciful. The people of Ad belied all the messengers when their brother Hud said to them, "Will you not be conscious of God? Behold, I am a trustworthy messenger sent unto you. So remain conscious of God and obey me, and I ask of you no reward for this. My reward rests with none but the sustainer of all the worlds. Do you build monuments on every high place merely to indulge in idle play? And do you erect mighty palaces as though you could live forever? And when you strike mercilessly like tyrants. So remain conscious of God and obey me. And remain conscious of him who has provided you with all that you know, who has provided you with flocks and children and gardens and springs. Behold, I fear for you the suffering of an awesome day. But they said, "It is all the same to us whether you admonish or are not among those who admonish. This is nothing but the custom of the ancients, and we shall not be punished." Thus they gave him the lie, and so we destroyed them. Behold, in this there is indeed a sign, yet most of them will not believe, and verily your sustainer. He alone is Almighty, a dispenser of grace. The people of Hud dwelled in Al-Ahqaf, a region of sandy hills near Hadramaut in Yemen. They came after the people of Noah and were among those whose hearts had strayed, after the deluge that cleansed the earth of its disobedient inhabitants. This story has been recounted in detail in Surah Al-Araf and Surah Hud, and briefly in Surah Al-Mu'minun, where neither the name of Hud nor his people, Ad, is mentioned. Here it is presented in a concise form, focusing on two aspects: Hud's call to his people and the fate that befell those who rejected him. The narrative begins, as the story of Noah does. The people of Ad belied all the messengers. Their brother Hud said to them, "Will you not be conscious of God? Behold, I am a trustworthy messenger sent unto you. So remain conscious of God and obey me. And I ask of you no reward for this. My reward rests with none but the sustainer of all the worlds." This is the single universal call that every messenger proclaims, a call to God consciousness and obedience to his messenger. It is also an assertion of the messenger's detachment from worldly gains, a declaration of his indifference to the fleeting values of this earthly life, and a yearning for the noble recompense of God. Hud then addresses the specific conditions of his people and their behaviours. He reproaches their extravagance in construction, which they indulged in solely to boast of their wealth and capability. Do you build monuments on every high place merely to indulge in idle play? The word high place refers to elevated ground, suggesting that they erected edifices upon hills to serve as visible symbols of their power and pride. These constructions were not intended for practical purposes, such as guiding travellers, for Hud explicitly calls them futile play. Thus, he directs them toward investing their efforts, skills and wealth in pursuits that are necessary and beneficial rather than wasteful and vain. He continues, "And do you erect mighty palaces as though you could live forever?" This implies that they built fortifications and lavish palaces with the illusion of immortality, imagining that such structures could shield them from death and destruction. Hud also condemns their oppressive behavior. "And when you strike mercilessly like tyrants." The people of Ad were brutal and arrogant, exerting their power with cruel force, unrestrained by any sense of justice or humility. Hud seeks to temper their pride and violence by calling them back to God consciousness and obedience. So remain conscious of God and obey me. He reminds them of God's blessings and provision, gifts that they had received in abundance. And remain conscious of him who has provided you with all that you know, who has provided you with flocks and children and gardens and springs. These were the blessings they enjoyed: flocks, offspring, lush gardens and flowing springs, yet they failed to show gratitude or humility. Hud warns them of the consequences of their ingratitude. "Behold, I fear for you the suffering of an awesome day." Hud's warning is tender and filled with concern, for he is their brother, one of their own, and he genuinely fears for them the torment of that inevitable day. But their hearts were hardened, and they responded with mockery and defiance. "It is all the same to us whether you admonish or are not among those who admonish. This is nothing but the custom of the ancients, and we shall not be punished." Their words reflect their indifference, their disdain for Hud's counsel, and their blind adherence to tradition. They dismissed his warnings as mere echoes of ancient tales and denied the possibility of divine retribution. The narrative does not dwell on the disputes that may have arisen between Hud and his people, but swiftly moves to the ultimate outcome. Thus they gave him the lie, and so we destroyed them. In just a few words, the fate of the mighty and arrogant people of Ad is sealed. Their monumental constructions, their gardens, their springs, their flocks, and their children all were swept away. How many nations, after Ad, have fallen into the same delusion, mistaking their technological advancements and material achievements for invulnerability, forgetting their dependence on God and imagining themselves self-sufficient? And how often has the same end overtaken them, as calamities descended upon them from above and below, shattering their illusions of permanence? Behold, in this there is indeed a sign, yet most of them will not believe. And verily your sustainer, he alone is almighty, a dispenser of grace. The people of Thamud denied all the messengers, when their brother Salih said to them, "Will you not be conscious of God? Behold, I am a trustworthy messenger sent unto you, so remain conscious of God and obey me, and I ask of you no reward for this. My reward rests with none but the sustainer of all the worlds. Will you be left secure in the comforts that surround you here amid gardens and springs, and fields sown with crops, and palm trees laden with soft, ripe fruit? And will you go on hewing out of the mountains houses with supreme skill and pride? So remain conscious of God and obey me. And do not follow the counsel of those who are wasteful, those who spread corruption on earth and do not set things aright." But they said, "You are nothing but one of those bewitched. You are nothing but a mortal like ourselves. So bring forth a sign if you are indeed truthful." Salih said, "Behold, here is a she-camel. She shall have her share of water, and you shall have your share on an appointed day. But do not harm her, lest the suffering of a tremendous day befall you." Yet they cruelly slaughtered her, and then they were filled with remorse, and so the punishment overtook them. Behold, in this there is indeed a sign, but most of them will not believe. And verily, your sustainer, he alone is almighty, a dispenser of grace. It is the same call with the same words that every messenger proclaims. The Qur'an, by deliberate design, unites the narratives of all prophets through the repetition of their words, underscoring the oneness of the divine message in its essence and methodology. Faith in God, God consciousness, and obedience to the messenger sent by him. After this universal call, the account turns to what is unique to the people of Thamud, shaped by their particular circumstances and the nature of their time. Their brother, Salih, reminds them of the blessings they enjoy, blessings they have taken for granted, and warns them of the consequences of ingratitude. The people of Thamud lived in Al-Hijr, between Syria and the Hijaz, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, passed by their ruined dwellings with his companions during the expedition to Tabuk. Salih admonished them, saying, "Will you be left secure in the comforts that surround you here amid gardens and springs and fields sown with crops and palm trees laden with soft, ripe fruit? And will you go on hewing out of the mountains houses with supreme skill and pride?" They lived amid these blessings which their brother Salih vividly painted for them, yet they were heedless of the one who had granted them such bounty. They gave no thought to the origin of these blessings, nor did they show gratitude to the benefactor who provided them. Thus Salih sought to awaken their hearts, to make them ponder the value of what they had, and to instill in them the fear of losing it. His words carried a tone that awakened drowsy hearts and stirred concern. Will you be left secure in the comforts that surround you here? Do you think you will be left undisturbed in this life of ease, luxury and abundance, this life where all that you cherish is magnified and exalted? Will you remain safe from loss, untouched by deprivation, unshaken by the prospect of change? He continued to paint for them the splendour of their lives, amid gardens and springs and fields sown with crops and palm trees laden with soft, ripe fruit. The imagery of soft, ripe fruit, so easy to digest, so effortlessly enjoyed, evokes the fullness of their blessings. And will you go on hewing out of the mountains houses with supreme skill and pride? They carved dwellings into the mountains, showcasing their ingenuity, craftsmanship and elegance, but all of this was a source of pride and arrogance rather than gratitude and humility. After awakening their hearts, Salih called them to God consciousness, obedience, and a rejection of the corrupt leadership of their society. So remain conscious of God and obey me, and do not follow the counsel of those who are wasteful, those who spread corruption on earth and do not set things aright. But these admonitions fell on deaf ears. Their hearts were hard and their arrogance shielded them from the truth. They mocked Salih, saying, "You are nothing but one of those bewitched. You are nothing but a mortal like ourselves, so bring forth a sign if you are indeed truthful." Their rejection was full of disdain. They accused him of being deluded, as if the call to God could only come from a man whose mind had been bewitched. They dismissed him as a mere mortal, unable to fathom how a messenger of God could be one of them. This has been the recurring objection of humanity generation after generation whenever a prophet was sent to them. Their limited understanding could not grasp why God would choose a human to be his messenger. Humanity has always imagined that a messenger of God must be something other than human. They could not comprehend the divine wisdom in choosing a mortal, someone who eats, sleeps, marries, walks in the markets, and experiences human emotions and struggles, yet is uniquely gifted to receive divine guidance and communicate it to others. And like many others, the people of Thamud demanded a miracle as proof of Salih's truth. So bring forth a sign, if you are indeed truthful. In response, God granted Salih the miraculous she-camel, which the people of Thamud had requested. Salih warned them, "Behold, here is a she-camel. She shall have her share of water, and you shall have your share on an appointed day. But do not harm her, lest the suffering of a tremendous day befall you." The terms were clear. The she-camel would have a designated day to drink from the water, and the people of Thamud would have theirs. They were not to harm her or interfere with her share, nor were they to mix their water with hers. Any harm done to her would invite divine punishment. But what did this miraculous sign achieve in the hearts of these stubborn people? It failed to plant faith in their barren souls. It failed to illuminate their darkened spirits. Despite their initial awe, they soon turned against the she-camel and violated the covenant they had agreed upon. Yet they cruelly slaughtered her, and then they were filled with remorse. The term slaughtered here refers to their brutal killing of the she-camel. Those who committed this heinous act were the same ones who spread corruption on earth and refused to set things aright. Salih had warned them repeatedly, but they heeded neither the warnings nor the consequences. The sin of slaughtering the she-camel became a collective crime, for they all bore responsibility for this grave transgression. Though they regretted their actions, it was too late. The warning of Salih had come to pass, and so the punishment overtook them. The nature of their punishment is not detailed here, as the narrative hastens to its conclusion. The account ends with a reflective statement. "Behold, in this there is indeed a sign, but most of them will not believe. And verily, your sustainer, he alone is almighty, a dispenser of grace." The people of Lot rejected all the messengers. When their brother Lot said to them, "Will you not be conscious of God? Behold, I am unto you a trustworthy messenger. So be conscious of God and obey me. I do not ask you for any reward for this message. My reward rests with none but the sustainer of all the worlds. Do you approach men with lust from among all creation and forsake the wives whom your sustainer has created for you? Nay, but you are a people who transgress all bounds." They said, "If you do not desist, O Lot, you will most certainly be expelled from our midst." He replied, "Indeed, I utterly abhor your deeds. My sustainer, deliver me and my family from what they do." And so we saved him and his family, all of them, except for an old woman who was among those who stayed behind. Then we utterly destroyed the others, and we rained upon them a rain of destruction. Dreadful indeed was the reign of those who had been forewarned. Verily, in this there is a sign, yet most of them were not believers. and indeed your sustainer is truly almighty, an ever-merciful one. The story of Lot is presented here, linked in historical context to that of Abraham. But as we have already observed, this surah does not dwell on chronological history. Instead, it emphasizes the unity of the divine message and method, as well as the inevitable outcome of rejection, salvation for the believers and destruction for the deniers. Lot begins his call to his people, as Noah, Hud and Salih had done before him, by reproaching their heedlessness, awakening their sense of piety and summoning them to faith and obedience. He assures them that he seeks no material gain from them in return for his guidance. Then he confronts them with a severe denunciation of their unnatural sin, a sin that history has come to associate with them. Do you approach men with lust from among all creation, and forsake the wives whom your sustainer has created for you? Nay, but you are a people who transgress all bounds. The infamous crime for which the people of Lot were known, they lived in several settlements in the valley of the Jordan, was their indulgence in sexual perversion, men approaching men instead of their wives. It was a gross deviation from the natural order of creation, for God had fashioned male and female, and instilled within each an innate inclination toward the other. This was part of his divine wisdom and purpose, the perpetuation of life through procreation which occurs through the union of man and woman. This natural inclination is but one aspect of the cosmic harmony that governs the entire universe, ensuring cooperation and continuity in fulfilling the divine will that sustains existence. Homosexual acts, however, have no purpose, achieve no end, and are utterly at odds with the natural order of creation. It is indeed strange that anyone could find pleasure in such acts. The pleasure that a man and a woman experience in their union is merely a means through which nature fulfills its purpose. But to deviate from this universal law is to sever oneself from the harmony of life, the rhythm of creation, and the very wisdom of existence. Thus, when Lot called upon his people to abandon this perversion, denouncing their abandonment of what their sustainer had created for them in their spouses, and condemning their defiance of the natural order, it became clear that they were unwilling to return to the path of life and the way of nature. Instead, they threatened him. "If you do not desist, O Lot, you will most certainly be expelled from our midst." Lot was a stranger among them, having come with his uncle Abraham when he separated himself from his father, his people, and his homeland. Together they had crossed the Jordan and settled in this land, accompanied by a small group of believers. Lot remained alone among these people until God sent him as a messenger to them, calling them back to the natural way. Yet, instead of heeding his call, they threatened to banish him if he persisted in inviting them to the straight path of nature and truth. At this point, Lot could no longer conceal his revulsion for their perversion. In disgust and abhorrence, he declared, "Indeed, I utterly abhor your deeds." The word Kalin signifies a deep and intense hatred. Lot hurled this strong expression of loathing at them, unable to bear their depravity any longer. Then he turned to his sustainer, seeking deliverance from the evil that surrounded him and his family. "My sustainer, deliver me and my family from what they do." Although he himself did not partake in their deeds, his pure and upright nature could not endure the presence of such corruption. He instinctively recognized that their deeds were destructive and ruinous, and he pleaded with his sustainer to save him and his family before the calamity befell them. God answered the prayer of his prophet, and so we saved him and his family, all of them, except for an old woman who was among those who stayed behind. This old woman was Lot's wife, as mentioned in other surahs. She was a woman of ill character who approved of her people's vile deeds and supported them in their corruption. Then we utterly destroyed the others, and we rained upon them a rain of destruction. Dreadful indeed was the reign of those who had been forewarned. It is said that their towns were overturned and submerged under water, and among them was the settlement of Sodom. Some believe that these towns now lie beneath the Dead Sea in Jordan. Geologists have suggested that the Dead Sea covers what was once inhabited land, and archaeologists have uncovered remnants of a fortress near the sea, along with an altar used for sacrifices. Whatever the case may be, The Qur'an has recounted the story of Lot's people in these terms, and its account is decisive and final. After narrating the fate of these people, the Qur'an concludes with the oft-repeated reflection, "Indeed, in this there is a sign. Yet most of them were not believers, and indeed your sustainer is truly almighty, an ever-merciful one." The people of the thicket, Ashab al-Aika, rejected the messengers. When Shu'aib said to them, "Will you not be conscious of God? Behold, I am unto you a trustworthy messenger, so be conscious of God and obey me. And I do not ask you for any reward for this message. My reward rests with none but the sustainer of all the worlds. Give full measure and do not be of those who cause loss to others. And weigh with an even balance. Do not deprive people of what is rightfully theirs, and do not spread corruption on earth. And be conscious of him who created you and created the former generations." They replied, "You are but one of those bewitched. You are nothing but a human being like us, and we think that you are indeed a liar. So cause fragments from the sky to fall upon us if you are truthful." Shu'aib said, "My sustainer knows well all that you do." But they rejected him, and the punishment of the day of the canopy overtook them. Truly it was the punishment of a tremendous day. Verily in this there is a sign, yet most of them were not believers. And indeed your sustainer is truly almighty, an ever-merciful one. This is the story of Shu'aib, placed here within its historical context, which precedes the story of Moses. It is presented, like the other narratives of this surah, as a profound lesson. The people of the thicket, Ashab al-Aikar, are widely held to be the people of Madian. The thicket denotes a densely wooded area, and it appears that the settlement of Madian was situated near such a verdant grove. The location of Madian is believed to lie between the Hijaz and Palestine, near the Gulf of Aqaba. Shu'aib began his call to his people as every messenger before him began with their respective communities, by summoning them to the essence of faith and disavowing any worldly reward for his efforts. Then he turned to address their particular wrongdoing. "Give full measure and do not be of those who cause loss to others. Weigh with an even balance, do not deprive people of what is rightfully theirs, and do not spread corruption on earth." Their misdeeds, as mentioned in the surahs Al-Araf and Hud, included the deliberate manipulation of weights and measures. They would shortchange others in transactions, forcefully take more than what was rightfully theirs, and give less than what was due. They would buy goods at unfairly low prices and sell them at exorbitantly high rates. Their settlement appears to have been situated along a trade route, allowing them to exploit passing caravans with impunity. Shu'aib, therefore, commanded them to uphold justice and fairness in all their dealings, for true faith is always accompanied by upright conduct. A sound creed cannot turn a blind eye to justice and fairness in human interactions. Shu'aib then sought to awaken their hearts to a sense of piety by reminding them of their Creator, the one who brought them into being, as well as the generations who came before them. "And be conscious of Him who created you and created the former generations." But they responded with mockery and accusations. They said, "You are but one of those bewitched." They dismissed his message as the delusions of a man under a spell, rambling incoherently. They went further, questioning the very possibility of his prophethood. "You are nothing but a human being like us, and we think that you are indeed a liar." They even challenged him defiantly, daring him to bring upon them the punishment with which he had warned them. "So cause fragments from the sky to fall upon us, if you are truthful." This challenge was not made in earnest, but in mockery and arrogance. It was the taunt of those who belittle the truth and scorn its warnings, a taunt akin to that which the disbelievers hurled at the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In the face of their derision, Shu'aib replied with calm dignity, "My sustainer knows well all that you do." The narrative moves swiftly to its conclusion, without elaboration or delay, but they rejected him, and the punishment of the day of the canopy overtook them. Truly, it was the punishment of a tremendous day. It is said that they were first seized by an overwhelming heat, a suffocating, stifling intensity that left them gasping for air. Then they saw a canopy of shadow and sought refuge beneath it, finding momentary relief in its coolness. But this canopy turned into a consuming storm, with deafening thunderclaps and searing lightning that struck terror into their hearts and obliterated them entirely. This event became known as the Day of the Canopy, for the shadow of the canopy was the defining feature of that fateful day. And once again the Quran concludes this story with the familiar refrain, "Verily in this there is a sign, yet most of them were not believers, and indeed your sustainer is truly almighty, an ever merciful one." And thus, the stories in the Surah come to a close, followed by the final commentary. And verily this message is a revelation from the Sustainer of all worlds, brought down by the Spirit of faithfulness upon your heart, so that you may be among those who warn in the clear Arabic tongue. And truly, it is mentioned in the scriptures of the ancients. Is it not a sign for them that the learned among the children of Israel recognize it? Yet, even if we had sent it down to one who is not of their tongue, and he recited it to them, they would still not believe in it. Thus have we caused it to enter the hearts of the guilty, but they will not believe in it until they behold the suffering grievous, and so it will come to them suddenly, without their being aware of it, whereupon they will cry, "Can we have respite?" Do they then seek to hasten our punishment? Have you considered? If we let them enjoy life for years, and then there comes to them that which they were promised, how futile will it seem, all that they were given to enjoy? For never did we destroy any community without first sending them warners as a reminder, for never are we unjust. And this Quran is not brought down by the devils, it is neither fitting for them, nor are they able to produce its like. Verily they are debarred from hearing such divine inspiration. Hence do not invoke any deity alongside God, lest you find yourself among those who suffer. And warn your nearest kindred, and lower your wing in humility and kindness to those who follow you from among the believers. But if they disobey you, then say, "I am innocent of what you do." And place your trust in the Almighty, the Merciful, who sees you when you rise, and you're going about among those who prostrate themselves in worship. Indeed, He alone is all-hearing, all-knowing. Shall I tell you upon whom the devils descend? They descend upon every sinful liar who gives ear to them, and most of them are liars. And as for the poets, only those who are lost in error follow them. Do you not see how they wander in every valley, and that they say what they do not do? Except for those who believe and do righteous deeds and remember God unceasingly and defend themselves after having been wronged. But the wrongdoers will come to know what destiny awaits them. Thus ends the stories, all of them revolving around the narrative of the messengers and their messages, the story of rejection and denial, and the story of challenge and punishment. These stories began after the introduction of the Surah, which addressed specifically the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, and the polytheists of Quraysh. Perhaps you will destroy yourself with grief because they do not believe. If we so willed, we could send down upon them a sign from the heavens, such that their necks would remain humbled before it. But no reminder from the Most Gracious comes to them anew, except that they turn away from it. Indeed, they have denied, but soon will come to them the tidings of that which they mocked. Then the stories were narrated, each one serving as a model for these people who are soon to receive the tidings of that which they mocked. And when the stories came to an end, the discourse returned to the central theme of the surah, as introduced in its opening, with this concluding commentary. It speaks of the Quran, affirming that it is indeed a revelation from the Sustainer of all worlds, and that among its contents are these stories passed down through the ages. Here is the Quran, brought down by the Sustainer of all worlds. It points to the fact that the learned among the children of Israel recognize the truth of this messenger and the Qur'an that he brings, for it is mentioned in the scriptures of the ancients. Yet the idolaters persist in their obstinate denial of the manifest signs, claiming it to be sorcery or poetry. Even if this Qur'an were revealed to a non-Arab who then recited it to them in their own language, they still would not believe, for it is their stubbornness and arrogance, not the weakness of the evidence, that prevents them from believing. And it is not the devils who bring down this Quran to Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, as they descend with falsehood upon soothsayers. Nor is this Quran poetry, for it follows a structure and purpose far removed from the whimsical and impulsive nature of poetry. Poets roam aimlessly in every valley, driven by fleeting passions and emotions. But this Qur'an is a divine revelation brought down from on high to remind the disbelievers before God seizes them with punishment and before the tidings of that which they mocked come to pass. And the wrongdoers will come to know what destiny awaits them. And indeed, this is a revelation from the Sustainer of all worlds. It was brought down by the Spirit of faithfulness upon your heart, so that you may be among those who warn in the clear Arabic tongue. The Spirit of faithfulness is none other than Gabriel, peace be upon him, who brought this Quran from God to the heart of the messenger of God. Peace and blessings be upon him. Gabriel is trustworthy in what he conveys, preserving it without alteration. He brought it directly to the heart of the Prophet, who received it with immediate understanding and awareness, so that he might warn with it in the clear Arabic tongue, the language of his people, through which he calls them and recites to them the Qur'an. They know well the limits of human speech, and are fully aware that this Qur'an is not of the same nature as human words, even though it is in their language. Its arrangement, its meanings, its methodology, and its coherence all testify with certainty that it comes from a source beyond human capacity. From this intrinsic proof, the discourse transitions to yet another external proof. And verily, it is mentioned in the scriptures of the ancients. Is it not a sign for them that the learned among the children of Israel recognize it? The description of the messenger upon whom this Quran is revealed, as well as the core tenets of the faith he brings, are indeed mentioned in the scriptures of the ancients. Thus, the learned among the children of Israel had long anticipated this message, awaiting this messenger, and sensing that his time was near. They would even speak of him among themselves, as attested by the accounts of Salman the Persian and Abdullah ibn Salam. May God be pleased with them both. These reports are likewise established with certainty. Indeed, the disbelievers persist in their obstinacy and arrogance solely for the sake of obstinacy and arrogance, not due to the weakness of the proof, nor the inadequacy of the evidence. For even if someone were to come to them who could not speak Arabic, and recite to them this Quran in eloquent Arabic, they would neither believe in it nor acknowledge its truth, nor admit that it was divinely revealed to him. Even in the face of such a compelling proof, designed to confront the most hardened of deniers, and if we had sent it down unto one of the non-Arabs and he had recited it to them, they would not have believed in it. 26, 198, 199. In these words lies a solace for the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, and a vivid portrayal of their stubbornness and obstinacy in rejecting every proof. This is then followed by the declaration that their rejection is a trait ingrained within them, inseparable from their nature, due to their obstinate disbelief. Thus, it has been decreed that they will respond to the Qur'an with denial, as though their hearts were sealed, incapable of change, until the punishment overtakes them, while they remain heedless and oblivious. Thus, we have caused it to enter the hearts of the guilty. They will not believe in it until they behold the grievous suffering, and it will come upon them suddenly without their perceiving it. 26, 200, 202. The language here paints a vivid image of denial clinging to them, as though disbelief were woven into their very hearts. The Quran in their hearts exists only in a state of rejection. It will remain so until the moment when they are confronted with grievous punishment which will strike them suddenly, unawares. Indeed, some among them persisted in this state until they departed this world, whether by death or by being slain, only to meet their torment in the hereafter. And in that moment alone will their arrogance give way to regret. They will cry, "Will we be granted respite?" 26, 203. Will we be given another chance, another opportunity to make amends for what has been lost? But alas, such a chance is far beyond their reach. They had mocked and derided the punishment of God, hastening its arrival in arrogance and heedlessness, deceived by the fleeting pleasures of their worldly life, pleasures that dulled their senses and made them incapable of envisioning a transition from ease to torment. This is the way of those who live in comfort and luxury. Rarely does it occur to their minds that such blessings could be taken away, or that their condition might change. Thus, the Qur'an seeks to awaken them from this heedlessness and depicts their state when the punishment they had derided finally overtakes them. Do they wish to hasten our punishment? But consider, if we allow them to enjoy life for many years, and then there comes to them that which they were promised, what will all that they had enjoyed avail them? 26, 204, 207. Here, the scene of their mockery and hastening of the punishment is juxtaposed with the fulfillment of God's warning. All the years of ease and enjoyment are rendered meaningless, as if they had never been, unable to shield them from the punishment or lessen its severity. In this regard, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, related a profound hadith. The disbeliever will be brought forth and dipped into the fire but once, and then it will be said to him, "Have you ever known any goodness? Have you ever experienced any joy?" And he will say, "No, by God, my sustainer." And the most wretched person in the world who was a believer will be brought forth and dipped but once into paradise, and it will be said to him, "Have you ever known any misery? Have you ever experienced hardship?" And he will say, "No, by God, my sustainer." The Qur'an then warns them that such warnings are but a prelude to destruction. Yet, it is out of God's mercy that He does not punish a community until He has sent a messenger to remind them of the signs of faith and call them to the truth. And never have we destroyed a community without first sending to it a warner to remind them, for we are never unjust. 26, 208, 209. God has taken a covenant with humanity, inscribed within the very fabric of their innate nature, that they should acknowledge and worship Him alone. The pure human nature instinctively perceives the existence of the one Creator so long as it remains uncorrupted and unaltered. Moreover, the signs of faith are scattered throughout the universe, all bearing witness to the existence of the one true God. Yet when people forget this covenant of their innate nature and turn away from the signs of faith, a messenger is sent to remind them of what they have forgotten and awaken them from their heedlessness. Thus, revelation serves as a reminder to the forgetful and a wake-up call to the heedless, an additional manifestation of God's justice and mercy. And never do we destroy a community without first sending to it a reminder, for we are never unjust. 26, 209. Thereafter, the discourse turns back to the Qur'an itself. And the devils did not bring it down, for it is not befitting for them, nor are they able. Indeed, they are utterly cut off from hearing the divine message. 26, 210, 212. In the previous verses, it was established that the Qur'an is a revelation from the sustainer of all worlds, brought down by the trustworthy Spirit. The discussion then turned to their denial of the Qur'an and their mockery of the warnings it contains. Here the Qur'an refutes their baseless claim that it is inspired by devils, akin to the way soothsayers claim to receive their knowledge of the unseen from demons. But this Qur'an is far removed from such fabrications. It calls to guidance, righteousness and faith, while devils call to misguidance, corruption and disbelief. Moreover, the devils are incapable of producing such a revelation, for they are utterly cut off from access to the divine message. At this juncture, the discourse shifts to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, warning him against associating partners with God, despite him being the furthest of all people from such a thought. This warning is to emphasize to others the gravity of shirk, idolatry, and their need to avoid it. The Prophet is also commanded to warn his closest kin and to place his trust solely in God, who is ever watchful over him. So do not call upon any other deity alongside God, lest you be among those who are punished, and warn your nearest kin, and lower your wing to those who follow you from among the believers. But if they disobey you, say, "I am free of what you do," and place your trust in the Almighty, the Most Merciful, who sees you when you stand and your movements among those who prostrate themselves. For He alone is the all-hearing, the all-knowing. 26, 213, 220. If the messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, were to be punished for associating partners with God, a hypothetical impossibility used here for rhetorical emphasis, How then could anyone else escape divine punishment for such a crime? There is no favoritism in God's justice. Even the messenger himself would be subject to it were he to violate its principles. The command to warn his nearest kin carries profound lessons. The prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, is tasked with starting his mission among those closest to him to set an example for others. When this verse was revealed, the prophet ascended Mount Safa and called out to his people, saying, O sons of Abd al-Muttalib, O sons of fear, O sons of Lu'ay, were I to tell you that an army were advancing upon you from the valley, would you believe me? They replied, Yes, we have never known you to lie. He then declared, I am a warner to you of a severe punishment that lies ahead. At this, Abu Lahab exclaimed, May you perish for the rest of this day. Is this why you gathered us? And thus was revealed the verse, May the hands of Abu Lahab perish, and may he perish too. 111:1. In another narration, the Prophet addressed his family, saying, O Fatima, daughter of Muhammad, O Safiya, daughter of Abd al-Muttalib, O children of Abd al-Muttalib, I cannot avail you anything before God. Ask me of my wealth as you wish. He further warned them, saying, Save yourselves from the fire, for I cannot protect you from God. O Quraysh, O Banu Ka'b, save yourselves from the fire. O Fatima, daughter of Muhammad, save yourself from the fire, for I cannot avail you anything before God, though I will uphold the ties of kinship with you. These narrations reveal how the Prophet received this command and how he conveyed it to his closest kin. He absolved himself of their affairs, placing their fate entirely in the hands of God, and made it clear that their kinship with him would avail them nothing if their deeds did not align with faith. Even as the messenger of God, he could not intercede for them without God's permission. This is the essence of Islam in its purest clarity. No intermediaries between God and his servants, not even the Prophet himself. God then instructs the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, on how to treat those believers who respond to his call, and lower your wing to those who follow you from among the believers. 26:215. This is an eloquent image of gentleness, humility, and kindness, likened to a bird lowering its wings in tenderness and care. Indeed, this was the way of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, throughout his life. His character was the Qur'an itself, rendered into living form, a perfect embodiment of its teachings. And God also made it clear to him how to deal with the disobedient. He is to leave them to their sustainer and disassociate himself from their deeds. As God says, But if they disobey you, then say, I am free of what you do. This was in Mecca, before the messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, was commanded to fight the idolaters. Then God directs him, peace and blessings be upon him, to turn to his sustainer, establishing a constant bond of care and nearness. And place your trust in the Almighty, the Merciful, who sees you when you stand and your movements among those who prostrate themselves. Indeed, he alone is all-hearing, all-knowing. Leave them to their disobedience, dissociating yourself from their actions, and turn to your sustainer, relying upon him and seeking his help in all your affairs. God describes himself here with the two attributes frequently repeated in this surah, might and mercy. Then he fills the heart of the messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, with intimacy and closeness. For his sustainer sees him when he stands alone in prayer and sees him amidst the rows of prostrating worshippers. He sees him in his solitude, and he sees him among the congregation of the faithful, as he tends to them, organizes them, leads them, and moves among them. God sees his every movement and stillness, and he hears his whispers and supplications. Indeed, he alone is all-hearing, all-knowing. This phrasing conveys an intimate sense of divine care, closeness, watchfulness, and attention. Thus the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, always felt that he was under the shelter of his sustainer, in his proximity and his care. In this lofty realm of intimacy, he lived his life. The final section of the surah once again revolves around the Qur'an. In the first instance, it was affirmed that the Qur'an is a revelation from the sustainer of all worlds, brought down by the trustworthy Spirit. In the second instance, it was denied that the devils had any part in its descent, and now it is declared that devils do not descend upon someone like Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, with his truthfulness, integrity, and upright way of life. Rather, they descend upon every lying sinner, astray and corrupt, among the soothsayers who receive devilish whispers and spread them with exaggeration and deception. Shall I inform you upon whom the devils descend? They descend upon every sinful liar. They pass on hearsay, and most of them are liars. In Arabia, there were soothsayers who claimed that the jinn conveyed news to them, and people would turn to them and rely on their prophecies. Most of these soothsayers were liars, and believing in them was nothing more than a pursuit of illusions and falsehoods. Moreover, such individuals neither called to guidance nor enjoined righteousness, nor did they lead to faith. And such was not the way of the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, who called people to a straight path with this Qur'an. They would sometimes say about the Qur'an that it was poetry, and about the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, that he was a poet. They were perplexed as to how to confront this speech that had no equal, that penetrated people's hearts, stirred their emotions, and overcame their resistance in ways they could not counter. Thus, the Qur'an clarified in this surah that the way of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and that of the Qur'an is entirely distinct from the way of poets and poetry itself. The Qur'an follows a clear path, calls to a defined goal, and proceeds steadily along a straight course toward that goal. The messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, does not say one thing today and contradict it tomorrow, nor does he follow whims and fleeting emotions. Rather, he perseveres in his mission, remains steadfast in his belief, and adheres firmly to a path that is free of deviation. Poets, on the other hand, are not so. Poets are captives of fluctuating emotions and volatile passions, driven by their feelings to express whatever stirs within them. They view the same matter as black in one moment and white in another. They are pleased and say one thing, and then they are angered and say another. They are people of unstable temperaments, unable to remain constant. In addition, poets create worlds of illusion in which they dwell, imagining actions and outcomes and mistaking them for reality. They become affected by these illusions, and their concern for the actual realities of life diminishes, for they construct alternative realities in their imaginations and live in them. But such is not the case for the bearer of a specific mission, who seeks to realize it in the realm of actual life and among humanity. For a person with a mission has a goal, a method, and a path. He proceeds along his path, following his method, with eyes wide open, a heart fully aware, and a mind alert. He does not accept illusions, nor does he live in dreams, nor is he satisfied with visions until they transform into tangible reality in the lives of people. Thus, the way of the messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, and the way of poets are entirely different. There is no ambiguity in this matter, for it is clear and explicit. As for poets, only those who go astray follow them. Do you not see that they wander aimlessly in every valley, and that they say what they do not do? They follow whims and caprices, and as such the aimless and misguided follow them, those who are adrift with their desires, without a clear path or purpose. Poets wander aimlessly in every valley of emotion, thought and speech, swayed by the passions that dominate them in any given moment under the influence of some fleeting cause. They say what they do not do, for they live in worlds of their own creation, filled with illusions and fantasies that they prefer over the realities of life, which they find unappealing. Consequently, they utter many things they do not act upon, for they have experienced them only in their imagined worlds, which bear no relation to the tangible realities of human existence. The nature of Islam, as a comprehensive way of life meant for implementation in the real world, as a profound movement within human souls and outward realities, does not align with the nature of poets as humanity has generally known them. For poets create dreams in their imaginations and content themselves with them. Islam, however, seeks to make those dreams a reality, working to manifest them and channeling all emotions toward achieving that lofty ideal in the real world. Islam desires for people to confront the realities of life rather than fleeing from them into fanciful illusions. If these realities displease them or fail to align with Islam's principles, Islam drives them to change those realities and establish the path it ordains. Thus, There is no room left in human energy for fleeting and unattainable dreams. Islam channels this energy into achieving noble aspirations according to its grand and magnificent methodology. Nonetheless, Islam does not oppose poetry and art for their own sake, as might be misunderstood from the apparent wording. Rather, Islam opposes the path upon which poetry and art have often trodden, the path of unrestrained whims and passions, and the path of illusory dreams that distract their practitioners from realizing them. However, when the soul is anchored in the framework of Islam, and its artistic expressions are imbued with Islamic influences, when it works simultaneously to realize these noble sentiments in the real world, and does not content itself with creating imaginary worlds while leaving life distorted, regressive and ugly, then Islam welcomes poetry and art. When the soul adopts a fixed methodology aimed at an Islamic purpose, when it views the world through the lens of Islam, and when it expresses all this through poetry and art, then Islam neither dislikes poetry nor opposes art, as might be misunderstood from a superficial reading of the words. The Qur'an has directed both hearts and minds to the wonders of this universe and the mysteries of the human soul, both of which are the raw materials of poetry and art. The Qur'an, in its contemplation of the marvels of creation and the depths of the soul, has achieved a level of transparency, penetration and celebration of these wonders and beauties that no poetry has ever reached. Thus the Qur'an makes an exception to its general description of poets: "Except those who believe, do good deeds, remember God often and defend themselves after having been wronged." These are not included in the general description of poets. They are those who believe, whose hearts are filled with faith and whose lives are aligned with a righteous path. They do good deeds, channeling their energies toward beautiful and virtuous actions, not contenting themselves with mere imaginations and dreams. They defend themselves after being wronged, striving with their efforts to uphold the truth to which they adhere. Among these poets were those who championed the faith and its messenger during the struggle against idolatry and idolaters in the time of the Prophet. Peace and blessings be upon him. These included Hassan ibn Thabit, Ka'b ibn Malik, and Abdullah ibn Rawaha, may God be pleased with them, among the poets of the Ansar. Others included Abdullah ibn al-Zabari and Abu Sufyan ibn al-Harith ibn Abdul Muttalib, who used to satirize the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, in their days of Jahiliyyah. But when they embraced Islam, their faith became exemplary, and they praised the Prophet and defended Islam. It is authentically reported that the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, said to Hassan, "Satirize them or attack them with your poetry, for Gabriel is with you." And it is narrated from Abdul Rahman ibn Ka'b from his father that he said to the Prophet, "Peace and blessings be upon him. God has revealed concerning poets what he has revealed." The Prophet replied, "Indeed, the believer strives with both his sword and his tongue. By the one in whose hand is my soul, what you hurl at them is like arrows," reported by Imam Ahmad. The forms through which Islamic poetry and art manifest are many and varied according to their context. It is sufficient for poetry or art to emerge from an Islamic perspective on life in any of its aspects to be pleasing to Islam. It need not necessarily involve overt defense, confrontation, or direct invitation to Islam, nor glorification of Islam's days and figures. A mere reflection on the spread of night and the breath of dawn, infused with the consciousness of a Muslim who connects these scenes to God, constitutes Islamic poetry in its essence. A moment of illumination and connection with God, or with the creation that he brought into being, is enough to inspire poetry that Islam approves of. The dividing line is that Islam has a unique worldview encompassing all aspects of life and its relationships. Any poetry born of this worldview is poetry that Islam embraces. The Surah concludes with this veiled yet all-encompassing warning, "And those who have wronged will come to know to what kind of return they shall return." The Surah, which portrays the obstinacy and arrogance of the idolaters, their disdain for warnings, and their impatience for punishment, as well as the fates of those who denied the truth throughout the ages, ends with this ominous threat. It encapsulates the theme of the Surah, serving as its final awe-inspiring note, evoking images of divine retribution in various forms, stirring the imagination, and striking terror into the hearts of the wrongdoers with an overwhelming tremor.